It's 6 o'clock. Welcome, everybody, to the February 3rd Committee of the Whole. I will call this meeting to order and start with the territorial acknowledgement. We are still within the traditional and still current territories of the Wasanich people, and I feel that in acknowledging this, we set our intention as a settler government to begin to recognize our shared responsibility to the future of our peoples, reflect on how our decisions affect the land and all of our relations who share it. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. And you have the minutes of,
Call the question.
call the question, sorry. Call the question. All in favor? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Now you have the minutes of the regular Committee of the Whole meeting from January 20th in front of you.
I'll move the minutes be received.
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Okay, motion carried. We have presentations during the administration and finance section, so I will just move straight on to presentations there in administration and finance. And I will note that as we had last year, we have two special public participation periods. So we'll have one at the beginning where you can come forward, make comments on the budget as you've seen it so far and what you're thinking about that. And then we will have a second public participation period after our two presentations from the Shaw Centre for the Salish Sea and the Sydney Museum and Archives. And at that point, you can kind of bring forward any comments you have upon reflecting on the additional funding requests that you'd like to have council discuss. Council will be not having any further discussion after those comments come forward until our next Committee of the Whole meeting. But you still get your chance to say something to us before then. All right, moving on. So I'll open the floor. Would anybody like to come up to the microphone?
David Carverley, 9655 First Street. Just a short comment, if I may. I've been through the package and through the budget, very well prepared as always. And just a small item in year 2, which of course is not immediate, but I think brings in a more overall point, which is a survey, $20,000, on how satisfied the people of the town are with the services they receive. I know this was done back in, I believe it was 2013, was the last time there was such a survey. I think it's an excellent opportunity, but I think it needs to be tied in with other opportunities that come up. And if you don't mind, I'll take a second and just make the link. Particularly since this is the very bedrock of what I've spoken about before, which is public participation. And I noted today I haven't had a chance to read in detail the RFP, which came out on the 30th for the OCP review, but that also has a significant component for public engagement in it, particularly section 2.3.6. And in fact, looking all the way through this RFP, I was delighted to see an emphasis on public participation and public input. And I want to thank Council for that. You're certainly living up to what you got elected to do. But one minor item that you might put in there, and it might be something that could even substitute the $20,000 I've identified in year 2. In paragraph 3 or point 3 of that particular section, 2.3.6, it refers to open houses, workshops and other engagement events as needed to complete the specific project deliverables. Just as a suggestion, perhaps that survey from year 2 could be brought forward and could include, for example, things like social media or a program such as PlaceSpeak, which, or its equivalent, which is used very successfully elsewhere on the island and in other communities, that perhaps could be brought in earlier rather than later in order to get public feedback. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Anyone else? Calling a second time? Calling a third time? All right, we will move on to our presentation from the Shaw Center for the Salish Sea.
Perfect. Okay, should I start again? So for those of you who didn't hear me, I'm Janine Morris. I'm the president and treasurer of the Shaw Center for the Salish Sea. And with me tonight is Pauline Finn, executive director. So I'd like to start off by just extending our thank you to the mayor and council for this opportunity to present our current story. The support that our center has received from the town over the years has been incredible, and we're extremely grateful for the partnership that exists today. The town has supported us right through from the initial vision for our center and our stunning location through to this time last year, a critical moment for our organization's future, agreeing to provide us with additional funding over a 2-year period. Since our last presentation in January of last year, we've developed the requested metrics, as well as strengthened our valuable working relationship with town staff, specifically with Andrew and Randy, who have both been incredibly helpful to us. So you've generously, as I mentioned, already provided us with funding up to 2020. And this evening, we are asking you to commit to another 5 years of funding at a continued level of $205,000 per year from 2021 through to 2025 inclusive. So at this point, I'd just like to hand it over to Pauline, and she's going to tell you a little bit about where we've been and where we're going.
So thank you for inviting us to present. Thank you again. We're working hard to move our organization from surviving to thriving. And we're well on our way. This shift in mindset and way of operating is not possible without secure multi-year funding and, of course, ongoing careful business oversight. But first, did you know? In 2019, our animal care staff and critters contributed to 3 research studies with UVic, VIU, and the Western College of Veterinary Medicine. And just this past week, we were visited by a UBC researcher studying moon jellies, and we were able to utilize our collection to support his genetics research. Our center provides engaging, meaningful volunteer opportunities for about 150 folks. That translates into 12,000 hours of donated time. And as you know, volunteering has health benefits as well. So this is a way that we're giving back to this community to help especially our seniors, be more healthy. That includes cognitive, emotional, and social support with the volunteer opportunities. Our volunteers also keep us intimately connected to the community. So for the next few minutes, I will highlight the progress we've made since I stood here before you a year ago when I was only 6 months on the job. I'm going to highlight these categories: engineering, financial, team, marketing and communications, and our contributions to Sydney's vibrant community culture. This image, I always take a deep breath. So, after 8 years without planned reinvestment in infrastructure, the engineering condition of our physical plant needed critical attention. This image gives you a sense of what we were up against on the left, and on the right, how far we've come. You did require the engineering condition report, which was a great idea, thank you, and we delivered. All critical issues identified in that commissioned report have been addressed. All the critical issues have been addressed in 7 months. We attracted a new highly skilled engineering technician, Hugh Topin, who's just behind me here tonight. And with his skills and his broad experience, we are not just fixing things anymore. We are making things better, and we're looking to plan for a vibrant future, even for the equipment. This was not possible when our organization was operating in survival mode. I'm going to remind you all of this wonderful document that we prepared. This is our 10-year financial model. And this model includes ongoing infrastructure investment. Oops, I flipped ahead there, sorry. We are also achieving our financial performance targets as outlined in that plan. We developed our performance metrics, we set financial reserve targets, and we're achieving positive financial results. That includes attendance, revenue generation, both earned revenue and contributed revenue from other sources, and we're on track to finish this fiscal year on plan. Very exciting. With multi-year support from a family foundation, we've been investing thoughtfully in our team, in professional development opportunities and experiences that build capacity. An example is our full-time aquarium team is now together doing an internationally regarded aquarist course that is pretty intense. They're doing it together, and they're going to be among the best pretty soon. They already are, but they are going to be internationally accredited. Other professional development opportunities that we have provided for our team to make us better at delivering to our community include disability awareness, gender diversity, performance and presentation skills, and not-for-profit organizational governance. Note, none of this was possible when our organization was in survival mode. With a deliberate plan in place this year, we've expanded our print and digital communications efforts. And I'm going to put this guy here so I can take a deep breath. This is our little octopus on the shelf. So that was one of our social media campaigns we did leading up to Christmas. It was designed to raise awareness and build some traction leading up to Christmas, and it culminated on Christmas Day. We've also used local channels, Seaside Magazine, Peninsula News Review, and Star Cinema to tell our story, to promote our center, and of course, most importantly, to raise awareness about ocean conservation. We've been cross-promoting and building partnerships with White Spot, Harbor Cats, and Butterfly Gardens, to name a few. Some results to those campaigns. It's so exciting to have cause and effect with those kinds of investments. Our membership campaign, year to date, has already increased our membership revenue by 5%. It's pretty exciting stuff. And our largest increases are in the areas of adults, seniors, and a new category we added based on our community. They wanted to be able to add another adult to a family membership. We also have a bus, and it's been driving around South Vancouver Island since November. So if you see it, let me know. Take a picture. No, not if you're driving. But it's been great to see us around the town. So in terms of contributing to Sydney's vibrant community culture, the validated economic development multipliers that were referenced in last year's submission are used by industry and government. Using them, the combined economic impact of our 70,000 visitors and our $1 million annual income is in the ballpark of $6 to $9 million. I would argue, though, that those standard multipliers are just a portion of our story. Our impact goes beyond and is best seen and felt in the qualitative community benefits. And here you can see Sydney Sparkles, you can see the Sydney by the Sea Run, and our Oceans Day celebration. New this year is our portable touch tank on the left. That gives us an opportunity to take that unique hands-on animal encounter out into the community. And there we are at the library. And on the right-hand side, that's new this year, that is Santa Claus in the submarine. That was an added experience during our Merchants Open House, and we had 260 happy people in the sub with Santa. We're really excited about the work we do to shape young minds. From learning programs like Taught Tuesdays, soon to also be one Sunday a month, school workshops and summer camps, to collaborating with university service programs and providing unique career development opportunities for youth. This is a big part of what we do that we don't often talk about. We have lots of examples of career paths and pathways from folks, but I'm going to give you an example of Kennedy. And she's not here tonight, but there's a lot of people behind me that know Kennedy. She's pictured on the left, the one with the big smile. Her first experience with the center was at her 19th birthday. That's where she wanted to have her party as a 19-year-old. So she's special. From there, while she was studying at the Bamfield Marine Station, a classmate recommended our center as a great place for practical experience and a good resume builder. And so she came to us as an Oceaneer volunteer interpreter. Soon after, we hired her in a paid role as a summer camp educator. Then she became an aquarist volunteer. Those are coveted. People are working through our center to get to that position. And then currently, she's a full-time junior aquarist who's now leading her own projects and mentoring, and genuinely mentoring interns and other staff. Each logo on this slide represents a group that we have worked with this past year. We've either done something substantial with them or we're planning something. Together, we're stronger, and I think you all know that. I think I've heard it from many of you already. Together, we're stronger. I have an example of a togetherness program. We worked with the Friends of Shoal Harbor, the Roberts Bay Residents Association, and our center to bring ornithologist Rob Butler to Sydney. He's awesome. He's a great speaker. And we worked together. Each group did a little bit of a different role, brought him in. We had a sold-out audience. It was by donation. It paid for the costs, and then we split what was left between the three of us. It was great. Again, so none of this was possible when our organization was operating in survival mode. So I'm going to wrap up my little piece here. We're a great investment. Our work contributes to economic health, community health, shaping young minds, and of course, our town vibrancy. What I've just presented to you is what we've done in a year. Imagine what we can do with 5 years secured funding.
So we recognize that what we're asking for from the town reflects a very serious commitment to our center. And we know that there are many competing interests on the funding available to support organizations such as ours that strengthen the development of our community. Having said that, the center, being Sydney's #1 attraction, means that we're worth it, and it's worth it to you too. With a strong board of directors and a stronger than ever team of qualified, competent staff, we're better equipped to deliver now than ever before. To summarize, I'd just like to reiterate a few of the key points. So with the town's 2019 additional funding considered, the center is on track financially to the end of the year to finish in line with as planned, showing strong year-to-date results. Our impact to the community remains incredibly strong, as evidenced by the vast number of visitors attending the center, our continued outreach and involvement in many community-based partner events, and the countless number of volunteers who donate thousands of hours of their own time each year to an organization they feel passionately about supporting, and many of which are local Sydney residents. Our digital reach also continues to expand, attracting more visitors to the center and our town. And each of these measures and more, all driven by our center, are evidence of our substantial contributions to the overall vibrancy and financial health of our community. We've made tremendous progress to date with our respect to our maintenance and improvements to the center, but still have many future projects planned and ongoing capital expenditures, both of which are vital to continuing our recent success as well as ensuring the longevity of our center, but both of which also hinge heavily on available funding. Lastly, we are now on our way to developing our current 5-year strategic plan, another critical component to ensuring the center continues to move forward in a positive direction. So in order for us to meet our financial targets and allow us to keep this powerful momentum moving forward, ensuring our ongoing success, continued support from the town at an ongoing level of $205,000 per year is essential. And I just we included these stats because we thought it just really helped put things in perspective, that based on size, we're asking for 1.7% of your budget compared with what the Sydney Museum and the Mary Wynn Spear Center currently receive. So on that note, I'd just like to thank each and every one of you for your support to date, and we look forward to continuing this very valued partnership well into the future. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that presentation. Is there anyone on council who has questions you'd like to ask the presenters? Yep. Committee member Rintoul.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks very much, Pauline and Janine, for the presentation. Greatly appreciated, and I think it highlights really the work and effort that's gone in from your volunteers at the center, from your staff at the center, and not least of all from the board. And I concur, you've got a strong board, and I think they've really come behind and supported this initiative and given a lot of this a request and a lot of the success, some real credibility. So thanks to the board members who are here for your time and volunteerism as well. I think the profile of the center has increased anecdotally over the course of the year as well, and that's difficult to capture, but I do recollect seeing the Canucks Center for Autism hosting events at the center, and really that presence in the Lower Mainland and highlighting Sydney and the center, I think was really beneficial to see. So I appreciate seeing those types of partnerships having happened, and hopefully to continue to happen to help raise the profile of the community as a whole. Question, if I may, to Janine, I suppose, or perhaps Pauline. It's just around the financial performance. So in the letter dated January 31st that was sent to council on the appendix, it references contributed revenue ahead of plan by 21%. So this is a year-to-date update. I'm not familiar with contributed revenue. What's the definition of contributed?
That's a good question.
Revenue versus
It's
revenue.
what isn't earned. So that is a combination of grants, donations, and any sponsorships. Right now, I don't have any big sponsorships, but the contributed is, like, the town piece would be part of contributed, but that number doesn't include the town piece.
So you've experienced a lot of growth then from
for
your
sure.
grant
We've had-
applications in particular, or others?
I would say our biggest growth in that is actually grants, and one of my colleagues has been crazy successful, Deanna, here with government, federal government grant wage subsidies, really successful. Donations are up as well. Currently not sponsorship yet, but we're mobilizing to do some asks on that side.
Great, and I appreciate hearing that, and thank you for the clarification on what contributed revenue means. And I know that was one of the things when you came before council previously, was encouraging you to seek grant opportunities, and I'm pleased to hear you've had success with that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Great presentation, you guys. Thanks very much for that. A couple things I'd like to highlight and just commend you for is, learning more about the connections that you're making, like with the post-secondary institutions, and that, that they're coming to you guys for research. And I know you had a salmon project in the summer as well that I think UVic was involved in. So I think those are good things to highlight. I don't know that the rest of the community necessarily knows that stuff is there, so I think that's good to highlight. Also, impressed with, like, the amount of outreach that you're doing now, having that portable tank and being able to get out there. I think to extend your reach beyond your little footprint there is good as well. And just mention again the impressive work that you did in terms of the engineering assessment. And I think I've mentioned to council earlier in the year the tour that you took around the facilities to kind of see the before and after. And so it was very encouraging and impressive to see that you were able to accomplish that much. And then I guess the last thing, these are just comments, I don't really have any questions, but I think that the dashboard that you've come up with in working with staff is really good. And I think it's something that might be worth sharing with other community groups in the town, you know, to be sort of amended a little bit for their circumstances. But I think it's something worth maybe bringing up at your CAG meetings, because I think it's a good format, and it's easy to see at a glance sort of what's going on. So thanks for that, and yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Councillor Fowler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation this evening. You've come a long way, and I think we shouldn't overlook the surviving and thriving aspect. I certainly recall in years past it was very difficult. There was lots of great ideas, but it was very difficult to implement any of them because there were so many have-tos, and there was staff and volunteer burnout. So you've come a long way, and I want to congratulate you for the work that you have done, both on your own initiative and also at the town's behest. So congratulations for that. So one of the things, the photograph of the before and after of your infrastructure was shocking, and I would hate to see the centre get into a situation like that again. You have an engineer right now on the board, so my question is, what are you doing for succession planning? There's going to come a time this individual may not be able to or willing to or interested, and so that needs to be looked at so that you do have the right mix, whether it's on the board or access to it. That obviously is a very, very important feature and is to your benefit right now that you've got it. So from the community's perspective, thank you very much for volunteering your professional expertise. I think that is an incredible gain. I would like to echo what Councillor Rantoul and Councillor O'Keefe, certainly the university aspect of it interests me, and I remember when I was liaison there was comments about university students doing work projects at the centre and whatnot. And the outreach, is there anything more you can elaborate? Is there potential that this is an ongoing connection with universities?
What I would say for the moment is we have also a super talented chief aquarist who is also a veterinarian technician. So research that might happen at UBC, they can come to our center, and with her skill set, her special skill set, there's things that they can do at our center that they can't do on their own because they're graduate students, they're not veterinarian technicians. So we're just kind of beginning to get the word out there, but we're also connected with a world-class fish veterinarian. He's actually at VIU, and he's a mentor to our chief aquarist. So I think we've just scratched the surface, and we also she's also on mat leave, but you see her at our center many days with her little one. That's something I think we'll try to standardize, formalize, and think about how to scale when she returns from mat leave, because she's a pretty important piece of that puzzle. And I do want to add that Hugh is actually our full-time staff person. We have had engineers on our board, and I think, do we have an engineer right now? No. Not at the moment, but I completely understand and appreciate that we need more redundancy and backup and succession planning, because that is why these improvements were able to happen, because we had the right person.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have to commend you on getting so much accomplished in such a short time. That was actually one of the things that was most worrying to me, and to see you come so far is rather impressive so quickly. I do have one question. Looking at Appendix 1, 10-year financial forecast with current operational budget, I noted that the approved budget for this year up until 5 years from now, there's an increase of $195,000 in labor. Can you tell me what that is reflective of?
I think I can. I just want to make sure we're looking at the same thing. Is this what we're looking at? Yeah. Okay, so what I can say about the labor piece is the positions at the center have not been evaluated and cross-checked with the community yet. This is something that's on our radar to do. We've given a couple of super minor adjustments for folks who've been there for many, many years with no increases year over year, zero. So very minor we've been able to do so far this year. But the plan going forward includes both writing some of those positions and doing a proper research around that, not just, it will be thoughtfully done. And as we get a little bit further along in the model, to increase the FTE so we can do more. Once some of these initiatives build, you can't scale them and do more for the community with the same resources that you have. You can use volunteers to some extent, but you need professional folks that are there every day to really take new initiatives to the finish line, I guess.
Okay, thank you. I guess my only final comment is it's there's no doubt that you guys provide a great benefit to the community and that you are wildly popular. The whole 5-year, it's over $1 million, and for me, that's a lot of money. So I'm just kind of like, you know what, you can see where I'm going with this. It's just like I'm really having to give it a good think because of the large quantity of money that's involved, because, you know, we're responsible for the taxpayers' money. So, but, you know, I have to applaud you on everything you've done up to this point, and thank you for putting the time and to address the problems and things that we were requesting. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thank you for the presentation, and I echo all the positive comments that have been made by colleagues tonight, and an echo in particular how impressive it is that the addition of $60,000 in our grant, or the town's grant to the centre, has been used so I'll say comprehensively in terms of taking a look at all aspects of the aquarium's operations, whether it be physical plant engineering to visitor experience to community engagement. And again, congratulations to the board, to the staff, and to the volunteers for working together on such a comprehensive plan. You've referred to, or we've seen the 10-year financial plan, and you're made reference to a 5-year strategic plan being in the works. When do you hope to have the 5-year strategic plan, new 5-year strategic plan in place?
New by the summer. By this summer.
And I gather that will help inform or perhaps inform the 10-year financial plan, perhaps provide
Absolutely.
an update to,
So in terms of, we have allocation for investments, and some of those will be, exhibit experiences, but we really do want to hear from the community before we kind of make those decisions, those content decisions that really do define an organization like us.
And great to see the positive results that have already been highlighted by my colleagues. I just want to draw in the appendix to the covering letter that we received for tonight. It makes reference to June 1st to December 31st period, and the attendance at the center of some 41,000. 41,000. You made reference earlier, and we heard last year that typical attendance numbers in recent years have been about 70,000. Do you see, realizing that the summer is a very busy time, but do you see the 12-month period of 2019 coming close to that or surpassing that 70,000 mark?
We do see it as coming close. What I can say about the current trends is we're up on revenue in those areas, and we're just meeting target on volume, and that's because it's a bit of a different mix of tickets, because under 3s are free, and so we're tracking really close. Yeah, so
okay.
I think yes.
Great, that's good. Thank you. And a last question. There's reference again, and whether you mentioned it tonight, it's certainly in the information that you currently have about 4,500 members, and that I think you did mention that that's grown a little bit over the past year. But that's certainly a significant increase to the earlier years at the center, a very dramatic increase. When we received the helpful explanation of contributed revenue, have you found that having membership at that level, 4,000, 4,500, actually helps increase donations, apart from the membership revenue itself?
So I think that's a great question. I can't draw a direct line, but it's certainly in terms of our strategy planned for ramping up our donations. You have to be careful. You don't want to overdo it with your members. But in other organizations that have a membership base, that has proven to be helpful. I don't know yet. I don't have a cause and effect yet for us. We haven't asked our members for donations often, but we'll do it carefully and thoughtfully at the right moments.
Great. Thank you for that, and thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor O'Keefe again.
I do have a question. So, I forgot this one. So in the, I think this was in the report that we got earlier in January, through staff. And there was mention that in terms of the metrics, or the performance measures was one thing was, aside from the dashboard thing, but also maintaining an operating balance of $150,000. And then it made mention to capital reserve fund, and it talked about increasing on the capital reserve to strive to increase the balance to the optimal level to ensure sufficient funding for the long-term replace of capital assets. I just wonder if you have an idea of what do you see that optimal level being, like in terms of like an annual contribution? Any thoughts on that, or?
And Terry, can you just tell me what page you're looking
Oh,
at? Because I know
okay.
we can get there, but
Okay, it was
there's a lot of
It's
papers.
on the staff reports,
Yes, okay. This is
and
one.
it
Yep.
was on the last page. And, yeah, so for example, one of the goals will be to maintain a minimum operating balance of 150 with a preferred balance of at least 200. On the capital reserve side, they will strive to increase the balance to the optimal level to ensure sufficient funding for the long-term replacement of capital assets. So I just wasn't sure what optimal level meant.
Well, I think at this point, we kind of used that wording because we're not exactly sure of the exact
Okay.
number. I think a lot of that is gonna come when we put together our strategic plan that we're working on, that will
Okay.
involve nailing down our capital plan going forward. And once we can identify more specifically the things that we might anticipate needing, then that will give us a better idea of the level that we would
Right.
want to see in our capital reserve balance, yeah.
Okay, good, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else for a second time? All right. I will take the last question then. I guess I echo most of the comments, all of the comments really, of everyone at the table, that it is really, and especially what the mayor said about how you've managed to leverage only $60,000 really compared to the size of your operating budget into an awful lot of improvements in a really short period of time. And as you said, Paula, you were only there for 6 months and you managed to do that. And you've managed to, I think, attract new members to your board in that time, new staff, come up with all of these new initiatives, raise new funds. That really shows me, I think, that not only, are you a good organization for the town, you're a good organization. Like there's people at the helm here who have plans, who I feel can feel confident, want to take the center places, and that's really good to see. I guess the one thing when I look at your 10-year plan is I still see, and we saw this last time, kind of using the metric from, I think, the tourism industry to project increases in attendance year over year. That still goes for 10 years. And I wonder if there's a point at which you think the center will start to top out, and just the number of new people you will start to be able to bring in, even as you're bringing in maybe, more exhibits and things like that, and more partnerships. And I asked that because I went on a tour of industry on Friday, a number of council was there. And on one of the stops, at every stop we heard about these businesses' growth plans. And one of the attendees, it was Mr. Cavalier, he asked them, do you have a recession plan? Because the stop we were at, they're kind of a cyclical business. And you're very tourism based. You're kind of taking the top off of people's discretionary income. And so I'm wondering if you've thought of that, or will be thinking of that as you go into more strategic planning, to just get an idea of how much you could weather if tourism numbers start to drop. The coronavirus, nobody was expecting that. And that could be something that really starts cropping up more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly something we've thought of. We don't have a deliberate, explicit plan we can show, but I would argue that before I even arrived at the center, the decision to shift the actual fiscal year of the center was with that kind of thing in mind. So now our fiscal year starts on June 1st. So our first quarter is a really important quarter. And in fact, when I was at a Science World, they did the same thing. I didn't have anything to do with it, but they shifted it for the same reasons, so that the fiscal year started on both your most risky, but also if everything's going well, your most
Potentially your most lucrative
most
months.
lucrative months, so that at the end of that first quarter, if your revenue is down, that you're going to have to make adjustments to your expenses and your plans. And so I would also say that this is just a model, and we are managing our budget. I can manage the expenses really well. You can't always know what's going to happen with revenue, so we're still very cautious always. There's many projects that the people behind me are ready to go on, but until March break is over, they're not happening. Like we're managing that model weekly, not always meet weekly, but monthly for sure.
And I think last time I seem to remember there being questions about this, about, if there were exhibits that if expenses were getting very high to run some of your tanks, and if you have that data at the end of that quarter and you start to see where we're going to be struggling, if there are ways that you can scale back on some of, just the expense of just running an aquarium and the salt water, the filters and everything, without jeopardizing the long-term viability of some of those little ecosystems you've got going in there. If there's ways that you can be flexible in those expenses, or if there's kind of like the expense of running that, aquarium system is what it is, and it's not very flexible to changes, and that flexibility would kind of come off of programming and staffing. But it would be nicer if the fundamental aquarium itself, the really big ticket one, had some of that flexibility. Do you have?
Yeah, I can't answer that super smartly right at this time, but what I can say is that I think that's what makes it hard, because we have this awesome open system that makes our animal health better than some of the big ones. Like we're doing some good stuff. We're looking after our animals really, really well, and it's partly because we have a really interesting system, and we're working really hard and diligently to really manage that system and the critters. So there are examples of things like that have been done at the center in the past. So I have one example in my mind where a habitat was basically decommissioned, and there was a kind of a diorama put in there, and it was good, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't the same vitality as having live moving stuff. So there's some of that, but I think there's also a base that's not insignificant in terms of running it, because so much of our, like if you've been to the center, from when you walk in through the Jelly Drifters Gallery experience, from behind there on, the rest of it is all part of the open system. So that water is coming directly from the ocean and being pumped through 2 major pumps. And if you have any technical questions, you can answer. but that's one piece, even though it looks like little separate bits.
Okay.
So that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Oh, back to the mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Something you asked actually triggered another thought or question. While serving as a council liaison several years ago to the aquarium, the board and executive director undertook a formal, with outside consultation, a risk analysis of the center and the organization, with recession just being one of the risks to the center. Has that been done in recent years? Is that considered moving forward for the organization?
It hasn't been, but definitely considered. We need to do that again with our new reality, for sure. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Janine.
Thank you.
And we will bring up, I've covered up my agenda. Here we go. Sydney Museum and Archive have their presentation up next.
Madam Chair, members, thank you very much for this opportunity to share with you the successes of the museum and our future projects and endeavours. March is the 20th anniversary of the Sydney Museum in the old post office. We started out in the lower basement, and we're still in the basement, but with a much expanded and well-utilised space. We had a very successful travelling exhibit about Chief Dan George and the growth of the Indigenous rights movement in Canada, provided by North Vancouver Museum. This was followed by a Husseinich art exhibit featuring the top Indigenous artists on the Saanich Peninsula. We are continuing to build a strong relationship with the Saanich people, which we are continuing to maintain. We were on a half-hour show with the Shaw Cable TV program Indigenous Voices, where we were able to share about the art and where we were and how we were supporting Indigenous people. Along with that, we delivered 60,000 Lego pieces to 6 of the schools, the elementary schools on the peninsula, which they're delighted to have. The final attendance and donations figures for the year are the second highest, with just over 16,000 visitors. Highest attendance and donations for the Lego exhibit, it was the highest ever, with 12,000 visitors and 28,000 in donations. This year has started out strong with an exceptional Lego exhibit. It's bigger and better than ever. Sydney Museum will be hosting the national travelling exhibit, Snapshots of Canada, this summer on loan from the Canadian Museum of History in Ottawa. This is a real achievement as far as it coming to Sydney. It's special for Sydney and Greater Victoria. The other thing, Sydney Museum is now well recognised in British Columbia museum community, and we frequently receive requests for copies of our policies as well as other information on our procedures.
So in the last year, we achieved 2 grants, which were new to us. The first one was a Celebrate Canada grant, which was for the National First Peoples Day, and that was to a total of $1,000. And we also received a Museum Assistance Program, another federal grant to the tune of $14,000 to help us offset costs of bringing Chief Dan George in. We are again going to be applying for that to do the Snapshots of Canada. We've applied for another MAP grant to do a collections upgrade with disaster planning in mind, and a couple other grants this year as well. So we are seeking new sources of funding as well as bringing on new sponsorships. We have about 30 sponsors this year so far. The majority of those are for Family Day, which is a community event that we are helping put on in the community. We attract about 2,000 people over that weekend to the Lego exhibit, as well as bringing the professional Lego builder to Sydney. Most of the grants we have received or have applied for require that you have 50% of the cost yourself, either in kind or cash on hand, and we've managed to do that. We've applied for sponsorships from big companies such as Shaw Cable, the RBC Bank, Coast Capital Savings, TELUS, to name a few. Additional funds from donations have gone back into displays and equipment, including replacing the security camera system, as our old security camera system was failing last year. We've applied for grants to digitize the Peninsula News Review to make it searchable online, as well as disaster-proofing the collection storage from earthquakes and flooding, which is a hot topic here where we are. The finished storage area will provide one of the great standards for collections areas amongst museums of our size in BC, and in fact several of them in the larger museums as well. We're developing a custom database software specifically for museums for ourselves, and we're doing that with a company in town called Brunel Technical Solutions. They're our big corporate sponsor for that. They're doing all that work in kind for us. We're preparing collections and archival materials to be made searchable online, and that takes a considerable amount of effort, both volunteer and staff time to do that. We've done an audit in our archives in the last year, and we're going to be starting an audit of our artifact collection this summer.
The primary purpose of Sydney Museum is to provide a service to the residents of Sydney, North Saanich, and the Saanich Peninsula, to provide archival research and educational programs to local schools, and to welcome visitors from around the world. Local residents can be proud of their museum. Sydney Museum has an amazing team of volunteers, a very supportive board, and all this is achieved with only 2 staff members. We would like to request that Sydney Council approve an increase of $20,000, being half the amount required to hire a full-time assistant archivist education programmer. The focus of the new staff member will include developing our education program and expanding our archives services. We hope to receive matching support from North Saanich Council. Now, I don't know if there's any questions. I'd be happy to answer.
Councillor, okay.
Thanks for the presentation, you guys. So I have a few things. So in terms of the increases to hire educational programmer, do you have any info on the amount of education program you were able to do this year? And do you have some targets established for next year? Like what could we expect to see next year? Let's just say we'll accept that there wasn't that much this year, but that what would be the significant difference that we would see?
This morning we had 60 students through the museum over a 3-hour period. We went through, they had an incredible program of hands-on artifacts, working with an old letter with cursive writing, and also enjoying the Lego exhibit. We've got another 30 students coming tomorrow. Again, we'll be going through the same course and the same idea. We have had other schools coming, but it has not been what we would like. And that's why, because we are so stretched so thin, trying to cover everything that we're doing, it's just to go out there and really encourage more schools to come in, it just hasn't been possible for the moment. We definitely hope to increase the numbers.
Yeah, our education program as it stands right now hasn't been updated in a number of years now. We would like to see that happen. This program that we just ran, it was the first pilot project we did this year. It's to support our local schools going to BC Heritage Fair. So we had groups of grade 4 or 5s, and that program was something that I did on overtime, so unpaid time of over 20 hours in the last 2 weeks to create that program myself. We just don't have the time between the two of us to keep the museum running as well as invent all of these new programming. There's a lot of opportunity for programming at the museum. We see it. We just don't have the means of harnessing that and taking it to the schools.
And if I could add, last year we calculated between the two of us, we put in several hundred volunteer hours that we were never able to take off later. So that's our contribution and our support to the museum.
To answer your question, Councillor O'Keefe, we would like to see it increase by a lot. If I was to put a ballpark figure on that, I would like to see at least 50 school programs, if not towards the 100 mark. If we could have almost every class come in at least once over the course of the year, that would be amazing.
Great. Couple more, if I may. So I noticed you're talking about expanding the premises to twice the size. That would be great. And so what I'm wondering is, have you started saving for that, or do you have a reserve fund set up for capital improvements for the future?
No, we don't.
Okay, so perhaps in the future.
That's something
Okay.
that once it starts, we will be going, we'll go out to the community for sponsorships, we'll be looking for grants, and we'll be working every way that we can towards that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just one more, I think. So I know that that Lego brings in a lot of revenue for the museum, and is it 3 months? January, February, March, yeah, right. So it brings in a lot of revenue, a lot of people to the town, which is great. I've always had a little difficulty with it just because, you know, it's difficult to make the connection to how does this support or publicize our local history. So I guess what I'm wondering is, given, you know, if you were to receive additional funding from the town, do you think that would allow you to look at providing some more programming or exhibits that focus more on local history?
That's what we want to do. We just
Okay.
can't afford to do it yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a very important source of revenue for the moment for the operation of the museum and for putting back the funds into the growth of the museum internally. What we are hoping, and I think the travelling exhibit that's coming this summer, it's, as I say, a very major exhibit. It's probably one level below what the Royal BC Museum would have. And this is really a test case. We want to see just how well it's received, how many people will come. And if we are able to replace the Lego and concentrate specifically on history, on not only the local history but Canada-wide history, that would be the ideal.
When kids come to Lego, we kind of trick them a little bit because there is still history all throughout the museum. So they do learn something and they get comfortable coming in the museum, whereas maybe they wouldn't come otherwise.
Councillor O'Toole?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, Peter and Lisa, for your presentation. Much appreciated. I'm left feeling like you were kind of swinging for the fences this year with some of these visits, and you nailed it. You hit it out of the park, because the Chief Dan George exhibit, for example, certainly helped raise awareness, but also had some great exposure for the town and for the museum. So well done, and you do it very cost effectively, and I know you work hard at it. So thank you for that. A couple questions, if I may, that kind of related to the financials. I guess just initially one here around the Fruit Growers Association, the restricted funds, just for my interest's sake as much as anything. What's the history of those funds, and how can they be used?
The Senate Fruit Growers Association funds was given to us upon the disbandment of that group. What they did was they gave us their archives, and that was funds that they gave us to process the archives. I think it was 45 bankers boxes that were not organized at the time that we got them, so they allowed us to hire a contract worker to sort through those. And there was some funds left over, and they're being used to process donor files to bring out the database. So those are also in a bit of a state of disarray. So there was some funds left over from that, and we're using them to further the museum.
Okay, thank you.
They are essentially restricted funds, yes.
Yeah, thank you. And if I may, Madam Chair, just one more around membership and membership revenue that's shown here. It's a minor line on your income statement. Is there an opportunity to do more with that? I just note that the previous presentation, certainly membership is really highlights driving visitors and also a more and more significant revenue stream, I think, with some of the linkages that it provides. What's the thoughts around membership at the museum, and perhaps not even as a revenue stream, but how you link it to promoting the museum in general?
We would love to increase the membership. We have struggled with this. We have a membership committee. We have discussed all the different avenues, all the different things we can offer. One of the biggest challenges is that we don't charge admission, because that's one of the biggest drivers to getting people to take out a membership, because they either get a reduced or free admission. And as such, we don't. We can offer them a newsletter, and we can offer them certain other benefits, but...
We started this year offering members and volunteers only receptions before important exhibits. Our members and volunteers got to go to Lego early. They got to go to the Chief Dan George reception early. So we're trying to do value-added things, but again, a huge barrier is just that we're entrance by donation, which I think is important.
Thanks.
And also, I was going to say, it does take staff time, again, extra staff time. We do have volunteer support, the committee working with it, but it's still a challenge.
Okay. And finally, if I may, Madam Chair, what happens if, you've gone to North Saanich for funding as well, and you're looking for sort of the two municipalities to share the cost of the intended position? What are your plans if you're not as successful as you hope to be with respect to matching funding from both municipalities?
We would then go to part-time. We would hire somebody within that range, and hopefully we would be able to secure a grant through the Canada Works program that might possibly make up the difference. But of course that's temporary. But at least we would have 50% of the grant funding, and this is what they look for, that we supply 50%.
Okay, thanks very much.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, want to echo Councillor O'Toole's very positive comments on the highlights and success of the past year, in particular the Chief Dan George exhibit. I have a couple of questions, probably 4 questions, some around the financials and some around the position. I'll start with the financials, and one question is actually through to staff first. And I see that the Town of Sydney grant increased by about $1,500 from 218 to 219. Is there an annual cost of living or other increase that happens? Okay, thank you. That's great. And so very positive financial results in 2019 over 2018. I realize some of them are still projections until you get your final numbers. But revenue was certainly up some $28,000, and in taking into account expenses, you actually had a surplus, an operating surplus of nearly $21,000. Do you have future projections? We did see them for the Shaw Center. Do you have future projections in the next 1 to 5 years in terms of where you see revenue trends going?
No, because it's very reliant on the public when they come, because the 20,000 essentially was generated from the Lego exhibit. And with many exhibits, not only ours, but in certain areas, they tend to have a bit of a wave effect sometimes. A lot of people come one year and then I went this last year, I'm not going this year. So it's very, very challenging to try and project it. However, as you can see from our budget, we have increased the budget by a further 10,000 in anticipation of getting additional funds this year, reflecting what we achieved last year. And one of the big things is we have considerable limitations just how much we can do in the area that we are. The fact that we will be devoting the whole of the lower floor to the special exhibit coming in gives you a bit of an idea of the scope of just how big it is, and we're hoping that will attract a lot. So it's a little nebulous about just exactly how many we're coming. We can always project what our fixed costs are with staff, with utilities and everything like that. But as far as the number of people coming and why they come, that's always a challenge.
Okay, thank you for that. One more financial question, and this is parsing the numbers in the request a little bit. Apart from the split between the Sydney and North Saanich, of the $40,000, if both municipalities participated, $36,000 would be directed toward the assistant archivist educational programmer, and $30 short of $4,000 would go to additional 2020 payroll costs. And in your report, you make reference to the minimum wage increases that take effect. This is you're requesting that this become a line item, therefore, thus it become an annual increase.
20,000 be a line item.
Yeah,
yes.
It would be a long-term increase,
Yes.
sort of thing. So I can see the contribution in terms of the $36,000 towards the assistant archivist, but we'd in effect be providing $4,000 on an annual basis into the future for costs, and we're already providing a cost of living increase in our grant to the town. Could you speak to that?
Certainly can. One of the things is that contrary to what we put in a little while ago about the increases to the assistant director and the executive director getting increases in that amount, it will be absolutely minimal increases, and some of it will be taken from that. And we are way below the industry standard as far as the wages that the museum is paying. That's due in part that over the years I've tried very hard to keep costs down, and accordingly it's kept the wages down, everything. We are now running, I'd say 10,000 below on my wage for what the industry standard is for exactly the same, and the same with Alyssa in her position. It's considerably less. And for succession planning, if we are going to attract people to come as staff, we have to be able to gradually raise the wages to achieve that a comparable level and a competitive level. Because the standards that we have now, as far as museums are concerned, are incredibly high. What we're doing, and this is why we're being recognized by the BC Museums community, because our standards are exceptional. In order to maintain those, we have to have exceptional people in the future, and we have to be able to attract them.
It should also note that Peter just celebrated 25 years at the museum in his position, so congratulations.
Okay, I do want to acknowledge the case you make, but this is an increase to long-term funding. And if there are if we're to go to 3 paid positions within the organization, over 10 years we would be contributing $40,000 just just to salary increases for those 3 people. So I think having a built-in cost of living factor of approximately $1,500 a year, accounts for part of that, and perhaps a portion of this could be considered a part of a COLA. I'll leave that part for now, and like to speak to the position. Who is currently handling archivist responsibilities?
That would be me.
Okay, so the assistant would be reporting.
Right now, I devote about 1 day a week to the archives, but the way the archives are now, the audit, we have to accession probably about 60% of what's downstairs right now. So I can't do that on 1 day a week. And even if I had all 45 volunteers working with me, you do need special education to be an archivist. It is a specialized position. So that's what this person would be doing.
Okay. And again, it's the position, as you've described it, has 2 key responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
One is the archivist responsibilities, and the other is educational programmer. And we've heard more on the educational programmer side, which is very positive. What do you see their balance in between these 2 responsibilities?
It would kind of be seasonal because school's not in session all of the time, of course. So we would want to run things like spring break camps, and during that time there would be very minimal archivist work. But in order to create education programming, you have to do archivist research. That's where all of that content comes from. So it kind of lends itself that way, in that you do the research while you're working on the archives, and then you get ideas for education programming as you go, and then you can build those education programs for specific classes, and their education guides and curriculum change all the time. So we want to hear feedback from the teachers themselves as to what programs they want to see us provide.
So if there's an increase in educational programming, given the nature of school tours and that sort of thing, it doesn't really lead to an increase in revenue through that work. I mean, it's very beneficial for the community, it's beneficial for the museum, and the things that are there. In terms of the archivist role, in terms of having somebody dedicated to that more, you currently do charge for some archivist services that you provide?
We do, but those end up getting waived more often than not. For instance, if a town employee wants something, we don't charge them for that. If it's a secondary student, we don't charge them for that. So I'd say probably out of 10 requests that I get for information, 9 of them we don't charge anything at all.
Okay, so in terms of having more resource dedicated to assistant archivist or to archivist, you don't see a significant revenue opportunity there?
Not unless we start attracting a lot of publishing houses. I'm not going to charge a local author for doing research on Sydney history. We want them to do that. Whereas if a big corporation like Shaw Cable decided that they wanted to use a lot of archival photos in a program or something, then that's something that we would look at, of course. We really want to remove barriers to doing local history research. We don't want to be creating them by putting costs in place for archives work.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Could I just follow up on what you were saying about the cost of living increase, the cost of living increase that we get each year? We do have constant increases in utilities and other expenses that we have to address. And in general, the $1,500 doesn't always cover the cost. So it comes from what we're able to generate from people's donations, etc.
Go ahead. Councillor O'Keefe.
One more thing. There's always one more thing. What I would like to see more of is to be able to show to the community the value you're adding, some more metrics.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, just as we went through this with the Shaw Center, and I think they did a pretty good job at coming up with, that snapshot, that dashboard. And so I'm thinking I think it would be great to know things like, so how many people visited the archives this year, and how many, how much service we were able to give there, the number of school programs and the number of students, the number of outreach activities maybe. The digital outreach is also something that's commented on. So I think it would help build your case better for enhanced financial financial support. If the community can see, here's what we have now, and here's our plan to where we want to go, so we can see the correlation to the added investment. So just something to ponder.
We do have all those figures available. We can put them together and be able to publish them. That would be a great idea.
So in the context of something like this, when you're asking us, council, for money and the taxpayers to contribute more, I think it's a good time to bring that stuff forward so that we can see that.
Thank you, Councillor
Noted.
O'Keefe.
Thank
Yep.
you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Alyssa. Now moving on, I guess, to the presentation everyone has been waiting for. Mr. Hissick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I apologize to the group in front for having my back to them for the next hour or so. If you feel like moving to the other side, I think that might get more out of it. So, last time out I gave you an introduction to the budget. This time I'm not going to repeat everything, but I would like to add a little bit of context to what's already been included or stated in the past. Obviously, you're free to interrupt with questions at any time, but perhaps I can get through some of it before we start getting into the questions. So tonight's agenda will consist of a very brief recap of where we stand. I'll reiterate some of the key impacts and provide you a little bit of additional support info to add context to our discussion. And it'll be our first chance to consider the budget by the different areas that make it up, such as the utilities, supplementals, capital, and so on. As we all know by now, it's a three-stage process usually. Introductions already happened. This is our first chance to discuss it publicly, open it up for the community to weigh in as well. And there is an additional staff report on the agenda, which I hope provided some clarity on additional aspects of the budget. And following tonight, whatever changes are made by resolution will be built into a second draft, which will be reconsidered on the 18th, hopefully for approval, but additional meetings are possible if required. As mentioned last time, we're going into this with a 2.98% tax increase, which is about half of where we started last year. So I like to think of it as a good start. And that includes a number of new items that have not yet been approved by council. So the supplemental requests, such as from the museum and several others, I'm assuming that if they're approved, it'll be included in the 2.98%. However, if any of these items is not approved, it'll reduce the impact for 2020. So that impact on the average resident is approximately $45 a year. And while it's a less precise number, the impact on the average commercial property is about $173. And these are both estimates at this point. Quick reiteration of what you already know. The major impacts on that 2.98%, we're directing another $112,000 of current funding to capital, increasing our reserve contributions by just over $80,000. Net increase in supplemental requests are of $153,000. The debt servicing is decreasing from last year by about $112,000. CSB building and grounds maintenance, that's going up 36% to account for the larger footprint. and the RCMP contract, a modest increase of $29,000. I'd like to touch briefly on community support funding, which is always a big part of our budgets. So this is a tabular illustration of how these budgets have grown over the past 5 years. We went from a total of $687,000 in 2016 up to a projected just over $1 million in 2020. And this is a slightly more colorful version of the same information. It shows, goes back a couple of years further, just shows how much our community support has grown over the last 6 or 7 years. And this is for areas like the Winspear Center, the Shaw Center, the museum, economic development, and various other initiatives. And a full table is in your binder and on page 218. So this shows the importance of our growing community support funding. And I have to say that the more you work with our community partners, the more I spend time working with them, getting to know and trust them, the more I think it's an important and rewarding part of my job to support these people. The Economic Development Fund, here's a 5-year snapshot that you saw at the last meeting. Currently, we've got approximately $33,000 unallocated for 2020. A decision on the SIP funding for 2020 is up in the air, and one of the decisions to be made during the deliberations. You'll notice that it drops off for 2021, but we do expect them to come forward with a new 5-year budget in the fall of 2020. I won't give you the whole spiel about surplus funding. I think I covered it last time. It's the first balancing mechanism. I like to use at least $250,000 of surplus to balance the budget to avoid increasing taxes unnecessarily. And we have policies in place for what a sufficient level is to maintain for future operations. And once that balancing mechanism's been put in place and all the other revenues are factored in, we're down to property taxation as the final revenue balancing, if you will, to fund operations for the current year. And that tax increase is partially mitigated by new tax revenues from growth in our tax base, which is projected at $130,000 for 2020. And I think it's important to reiterate that whatever tax increase is approved by council, it's applied evenly across the board to all classes of property. So whatever residential gets, commercial gets as well. And we are somewhat in the middle of a tax policy review that's taking its time. But until we have made a policy decision to do it otherwise, it's an across the board increase of 2.98 or whatever we end up with. So taxes make up roughly 2/3 of our operating revenues in the general fund. And in terms of who gets the tax dollars that are levied on your property tax notice, for residential property, approximately 53% of the total remains with the municipality. For a commercial property, it's a little less, at about 48%. All that means is that we have a little less impact on commercial properties than we do on residential in terms of setting tax rates, because a lot of the tax rates are set by external entities like the province. In terms of where the tax dollars go once we levy the taxes, so roughly 18% goes to police protection, another 14.6 to public works, and this doesn't include the utilities. So our projected increase in tax revenues for 2020 is roughly $486,000, and the first 130 of that is covered by growth in the tax base, meaning a $356,000 increase in general taxes, which is 2.98%. same info, graphical format. Impact on the tax bill, as illustrated last time, it's about $45 for the average residential property. A look at the 5-year projection for taxes, because we do tend to focus on year one, and that's always the most important year, but it does pay to look a little forward. And right now we're projecting the largest tax impact for year one, which is slightly unusual. Usually year two tends to be a little heavier as we defer. We try and balance off the 5 years to the extent we can going in. But right now we're showing 2020 being the highest impact year. However, any reduction we make to the first year's taxes will impact future years as well, as you're starting from a lower base. Just to illustrate, last year's financial plan, year two, predicted a 2020 impact of close to 6%. We've managed to lower that or cut it in half, essentially going in. And the latter years of the plan tend to be understated, so you're looking at 23 and 24 at sub 1%. And while we do have a couple of plugs in there to try and account for items that we know are coming but aren't identified, we know that when we get to future years, new items will come up that we haven't yet accounted for. We do like to pay a little bit of attention to inflation versus tax increases. I know it's very popular among some of the watchdog groups out there, so I can't help but look at it. Just looking at the last 5 years, for instance, we're looking at a 10% cumulative growth in Victoria CPI, whereas we're sitting right now at 11.2% if the 2.98% were to be approved, which is roughly equivalent to inflation, even though, as you know, I'm not a very big fan of comparing one to the other for various reasons. The primary one being that CPI doesn't really measure our basket of goods, meaning construction costs, price of oil, those kind of things. And also, more importantly, it doesn't allow for growth in services. In addition to sorry, lost my train of thought there. So CPI is meant to measure the same basket of goods from year to year. If you're adding to that basket, it's no longer a relevant measure, although some would argue that it does measure people's ability to pay, and that's a valid comment. So changes in service levels from year to year. We've added quite a lot over the last 7 to 10 years in terms of 4 full-time firefighters to assist with daytime coverage, additional RCMP officer, additional community support, as we saw on that previous graph. So we're not really dealing with like for like when we're going from year to year. And there are non-discretionary increases that we can't really help, like increases in the RCMP contract, which this year are minimal, but in a typical year are more significant. And of course, trying to deal with the infamous infrastructure deficit, which we all know is a deferred expenditure, and we've been trying to catch up over the years by increasing our reserve transfers. If you're looking at budget reductions, it's not really the first place I wouldn't look is the operating budget, because of that surplus funding I used to balance. So basically, I'm expecting that we'll be able to generate savings on the operating side. So if you start cutting on our core operating funding, I would want to reduce the amount of surplus funding that is used to balance the budget, because I'd be no longer confident we'd be able to generate the level of savings required. So generally, the most likely source is looking at tax-funded capital as well as the supplemental requests. Those are discretionary to some degree in that council has not yet approved them. Obviously, they're very important in order to provide the level of requested services, but they have not yet been added to the core budget. In terms of separating our budget into sections to be reviewed, we'll be looking at utility budgets, then supplemental requests, tax-funded capital, perhaps other capital items, general operations perhaps, and I put question marks behind those because, well, the comments I just made about surplus, and then potentially other changes as well. Once we start looking at general operations, what you're really talking about is service level cuts, and that's a long and separate discussion we need to have if you want to go there. So the water operating fund is self-funding. It doesn't benefit from property taxation. It's parcel tax and utility fees, and as mentioned last time, no increases are being proposed for 2020. This was covered last time as well. There's a rate structure review going on, and more information on this will be coming forward throughout the year as we get through it. Sewer, like water, is self-funded. No tax funding goes in, and no increases are proposed for 2020. Supplemental requests are one-time or ongoing requests for new services or additional funding for existing services. And those have all been described in your budget document and highlighted in the staff report, and also tonight through 2 presentations. The main items are the OCP review, the Shaw Center request, which is being shown as an incremental item even though it's been approved for 2020, but it does have an impact, and I think it's important for council to see that. Civic site analysis is another one. A transfer to the ferry reserve, which was in last year's budget, and I'm highlighting again because this is year 1 that we're proposing to do it. The museum, and then various other smaller impacts totaling $52,000. So the net impact after last year's one-time items are removed is 153, and there are additional impacts in years 2 to 5 which are more significant than year 1, which is again unusual, but that's where we stand. We've got $10.1 million in the capital budget. This was covered last time. Various funding sources, most of it being reserves, gas tax, developer contributions. Property tax funding for capital is $317,000 and some odd dollars, and that's $113,000 more than last year. So that's an impact of roughly 1%. It's lower than historical levels, but it's closer to what I tend to call the new normal, which is roughly $300,000 that we throw at capital every year. Used to be closer to 5, but we're relying more on reserves and external funding these days. And the gas tax helped to reduce that over the last 4 or 5 years. In the staff report is a table showing the tax-funded capital projects. So perhaps when we start deliberating on those, this is one place to start. It's broken out into annual recurring budget items that we tend to have every year. A few projects carried forward from last year, and then a whole list of new projects that have been identified for 2020. A table showing the gas tax funding for the next 5 years as well. A new table showing the projected balances. So thanks to the one-time contribution from the federal government last year, we do have some spare capacity for 2020. What staff did, though, was we tried to identify as many projects as possible that were gas tax eligible. So I don't think we're going to find too many in the tax-funded list that might benefit from gas tax funding. We've already done that work for you. There's a number of projects funded also from the amenity reserve, and as we mentioned last time, we're trying to take advantage of this non-tax funding source to reduce the tax impact, but council will have to approve this use of money. And the same goes for the land sale reserve, which has a remaining balance from the sale of the old fire hall site. But aside from the Ray Creek Dam, which has received pre-approval, there are other projects here that council might want to consider and specifically approve the use of these funds for the projects. You'll notice there's a capital project in there relating to a public washroom that we call the Portland Loo. If you're wondering what that is, it's basically this structure. So staff have done research on available public washrooms that don't require bricks and mortar and don't have to be built into the into one of the buildings, although that remains a viable option for us to pursue a public washroom amenity through future developments. But for the time being, this is our best proposed solution, and it costs roughly $150,000 to purchase, deliver, and install one of these. So it's manufactured in Portland, and it costs roughly $90,000 to purchase, $90,000 US, and then you're dealing with installation costs, including water, sewer, and electrical hookup. We're proposing to try one in 2020, and depending on feedback and on success, we might do another one in 2022. In terms of potential locations, staff did a preliminary analysis of the downtown corridor and identified 6 potential locations ranging from behind the bandshell in Beacon Park all the way up Beacon Avenue. So this is very preliminary. These are all viable alternatives that can be serviced relatively easily. But before it's the location is chosen by council, we'll be doing some consulting, and we'll be asking you where you'd like it. So as we move forward in this meeting, any changes to the draft budget, I'd like to suggest that they be approved by resolution. And there are some specific items to be considered as we go through. It doesn't have to be tonight necessarily, but before the budget's approved on the 18th. So we have to consider the SIP funding for this year. We have to consider the Shaw funding for 2021 onwards, as well as all the supplemental requests in addition to that. And then the tax-funded capital. The capital funded from those 3 reserves that I just covered. And then we'll be looking at the utility budgets, the operating budget, and the capital in order. And ultimately, all of those have to be approved as amended. So with that introduction, I open it up to questions and comments.
All right. Does anybody have questions or comments? Mr. Hissett? Okay. Councilor Wainwright and third.
Thank you. So this isn't really a question. It's starting the discussion. And one of the things I'd like to talk about is this new climate action coordinator position. And the kind of questions that I had specifically were, of the money that we've got earmarked in the budget, how much of it is wages and benefits, and how much of it is funding to support the activities of that position?
The supplemental item that begins in year 2021 is entirely for personnel costs with the coordinator. So if there are projects in addition to that, they would be budgeted separately, and some are potentially included in the 5-year plan. and others that are identified will be costed separately as well.
Okay, so this is one of the things I had a bit of concern about, because while I'm in support of bringing on this position, I want to make sure that the position can actually be effective. And if it doesn't have funding available to pursue initiatives, then it's not going to be effective. And I appreciate that our budget currently has some things in it that are climate action related, but if we've already figured out what all the programs are, why do we need this new position to come up with ideas and programs? So I'm thinking that it's not a good idea if we don't have some support money available, because we're expecting this individual to do some community engagement, but there is no budget to support that. You know, advertising open houses, stuff like that. And if the individual is going to bring forward any initiative like a bylaw or whatever, there'll have to be some cost for legal review, whatever. One of the things I'm having a bit of an issue here is that the list of actions of things that are currently in the budget that could be undertaken by the Climate Action Coordinator, it's two different things. One of them is climate action and the other one is climate adaptation. And just to kind of clarify to my colleagues what I'm thinking, climate action is actions where we're trying to limit GHG emissions, or we're trying to do carbon sequestration. So, you know, planting trees fits that one, bringing more EVs into our fleet, that kind of thing. Those are climate action. Adaptation is things like dealing with sea level rise and so on. And we have things in here that I understand are in the budget that are climate adaptation. The thing is that the climate action we've said is an emergency, and the adaptation is stuff we're going to have to deal with, but we don't necessarily have to deal with it on an emergency basis. Like, it can happen over the next few years. It doesn't have to start this year. But arguably, the emergency response stuff we should be dealing with now. So I guess I want to make sure that we don't combine the two things in our thinking, because to me they are actually separate. And I can support a budget associated with climate action, and to me that has higher priority than a budget associated with climate adaptation. I think both are important, but one of them is now and the other one is coming. Because sea level rise isn't happening this year, only. I mean, it's progressive, it's very, and so on, but like we don't necessarily have to come up with a full adaptation plan this year. We have time. So what I'm looking to do, suggestion to my colleagues, I would like to have a budget available for the Climate Action Coordinator to do stuff we haven't already thought of. And in fact, what I'm thinking and looking towards is the Economic Development Fund, which has got $33,000 we haven't earmarked for anything already, and proposing to shift, I don't know, $25,000 into support for this climate action position. And I won't necessarily make that proposal now, but I wanted us to have a serious conversation about what is this position, what's it going to do, that sort of thing.
Okay, I actually have Councillor O'Keefe first and then the Mayor.
Well, while we're on the topic of the Climate Action Coordinator, I guess when I looked at the list, the things that it might cover, I thought, well, you know, some of those things could be done by existing staff in terms of the trees and some other things. So I guess what I'd like to see before we would approve it is a more well-defined work description, and if getting to Councillor Wainwright's point about coming up with specific stuff, you know, related to climate action right now is something that I would like to see with that. The other thing I thought maybe related to that is maybe the opportunity for that position to get involved with a climate change advisory group that some municipalities are looking at in order to help generate ideas. So I'll just toss it out there. In terms of questions for Andrew, though, so one question I had was about going to the Economic Development Fund and that 10,000 event supplement that we provide to the SBIA every year. And so in my questions to staff, it was about when I looked at the MOU, it seemed that the amount that we provide them for that related to some specific projects, like $4,000 for the Family Day Lego Festival, $5,000 for the Comic Con, Treat Street, and some other things. And so I guess what I was wondering is, since many of these things the SBIA is no longer involved organizing, and some of the other things that they are organizing seems to come under what would be expected under the events advisory supplement that they also get, or under the levy that they already get from the town. So I guess I'm just wondering if that $10,000 is still something that we should be continuing to pay, or whether it's reasonable for us to be able to ask for that back if they're not doing those things, so that we could allocate that to other things.
Thank you, Councillor. That list is an illustration. It's not necessarily set in stone and all-inclusive. In the past, they've proven extremely capable of removing some items from the list and replacing them with new initiatives. And there have been times where they've returned parts of the unused funding to the town, or at least half of it, and gone on to add additional events. And I believe, as you know, we do still have that agreement in place where we have to give them that money for a couple more years, and then it's subject to review. But going back to the inception of that agreement, it ties in with the partial funding for the event coordinator position, and that was in lieu of the town hiring its own event coordinator. So we provided them with a little bit of funding, and they do use a portion of the levy to supplement that and pay for the other half, and that's done by the executive director. And this supplement was put in place for specific sponsorship for the increasing number of events they bring to town, and the ever-changing events as well.
Okay, so I guess, is that something that they would provide to us in their annual report, to say that, okay, we no longer need $4,000 for Lego or $5,000 for the Comic Con, but here's the other events, as to show that here's where the town is getting the equivalent value for those things.
There is a very comprehensive report from CIAG at the end of every year outlining everything they've done in the past year. I believe that's been received, but has not yet made its way to an agenda.
Okay, so.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Going to Councillor O'Keefe's remarks first, through the staff, my recollection is that that $10,000 was also, part of those monies were assigned to short-term contractors to help with particular events.
That's right.
And they continue to do that. For example, the Christmas events in Sydney, they still do it. They still share some of that cost for things like Family Day and so on. So while there's other organizations that may be the lead on it, the BIA is still submitting, or still has some short-term contractor funds going to people that help execute or promote those events. like to come back, and thanks to Councillor Wainwright for bringing out that aspect of the budget. A question through to staff, and I do acknowledge one of the key points made in terms of distinguishing between climate action, climate mitigation, and climate adaptation. Did the staff in sketching out some of the information that they provided intend or foresee this position doing both, or was there very much consideration given to that?
Honestly, the intent was to get going. We do not have the internal capacity to deal with this declared emergency. We can't fit one more thing onto the corners of our desks, so we need to get going and we need to flesh out all of these ideas, and that's what we need the funding for. And these additional budget items will follow when we have someone to start looking into this stuff in detail. And the partial list we gave you is just that, a partial list, and honestly, we'd like to get to it, we just need help.
No, thank you for that, and I appreciate what you're saying, and you know, you just highlighted 17 items, and probably around this table we could come up with another 10 or 15 in short order. So I appreciate the priority that is being set in terms of including this in the budget. I guess a question through to staff, or even back to Councillor Wainwright with your experience. Apart from what the focus might be, would you see the skill set of such a coordinator coming on board being able to manage the position of climate action and mitigation, as well as providing information or expertise in climate adaptation?
So this is a 2-year term position, and I think that the individual could reasonably apply for grants for the climate adaptation side of things, because obviously we're going to need to develop some kind of plan. But I'm also thinking that activity significantly overlaps with our engineering and planning departments. So because we're not going to be able to do that unless they are significantly engaged. And I guess I'm thinking because of that, the serious kickoff on the adaptation planning part is probably not really going to happen until we get the OCP review out of the way. And that's, you know, it's only a 2-year term position. That adaptation planning is probably happening after the 2-year term is up. But, you know, the individual can set the stage, help maybe get some grants, that kind of thing. But I guess I'd be thinking most of the focus during the 2-year term should be on the action part, and the skill sets are definitely going to be related. There's no question about that.
Okay, thank you for that. Sorry,
if I can, Mr. Mayor. So one of the things we did do is we took a look at job descriptions for this position, and I think there is some overlap between the action and adaptation component. Certainly when we looked at job descriptions for this, there seemed to be a bit of both. The other element to this is really looking at the updating of the climate action plan, and that was something that that council raised and spearheaded the discussion about the climate action coordinator. So that's something that we really want to focus on as well as part of this. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Great, thank you for that. So I do support what Councillor Wainwright is saying, and the view that this position should be heavily weighted to climate action and climate mitigation. But given the skill set, and given that we will be facing climate adaptation challenges in the future, that whatever the time horizon is vis-a-vis the OCP and so on, that if there are opportunities, it could be encompassed within the as a minor part of it could be encompassed within the job description. With regards to the suggestion or the recommendation of having a budget associated with this position, we'll note that in the budget it's set for the start of this position to be April of 2021. So it's not an annual cost even in 2021. So it will go 2 years from April 1st, if I'm correct. And so normally we don't set aside a pool of money, you know, in a general way. It's usually directed towards particular initiatives, particular projects, particular costs. An exception to that would be our OCP. So we've allocated a sizable budget to that. We don't yet have all of the details in terms of what amount we will be spending on community engagement or what amount we'll be spending on a particular piece. So I would be in favor of suggesting to staff, or perhaps we could recommend to staff, that they bring forward to the next budget deliberations an amount that could be put in proportional for 2021 that might be set aside as a general budget associated with this position, because I think once this position is underway, it will be a case where there will be some funds required, and even though we can't say today how much will be spent on engagement or some other aspect, and there may be grants available, it would be good to put a small budget associated with this position, and we can certainly amend that as we go into 2021 and beyond.
Councillor Gordette.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hisik, for your, as usual, lively presentation. Just back to the Climate Action Coordinator, just a different way of looking at it. It's recommended at approximately $90,000 per year. Is that an industry standard, or are we paying a little more to try and attract somebody who's maybe better qualified, or do we have an idea?
It's a ballpark estimate based on what the kind of person others have hired.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily top of the range, but nor will this person be responsible for all the work related to climate action. We just need someone to do a lot of the groundwork, investigation, and then it'll be a team effort like many other things.
Okay. With regards to the converting engineering technician to permanent status, has a salary down there of $88,725. Were they paid something similar before as an intern, or whatever the term program was, or?
They were.
And this is again an industry standard. I just want to make sure that we're not.
Salary, benefit, and payroll costs, yes.
Okay. The last thing I'd like to touch on, I guess this is more a question to staff, to Mr. Robinson. Do you have the final numbers for the snow event that happened in January and what it cost the town? I had a preliminary of $68,000. I'm not sure if that's the final indication of numbers for it.
For this year's event?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have the finals in yet. I'm still got some bills for some salt materials.
Okay. So it's could be possible it's more. The reason I bring that up is I mentioned last year that I feel that this could be our new climate reality in terms of climate change. And this 2 years in a row now, last year I think was 113,000. This year 68, possibly over 70. And we're not done winter yet. We could have, I saw the long-term forecast potential for more snow coming. And I'm wondering if the 36, I know we can shift monies around, but I'm wondering if maybe we need to be budgeting more than $36,000 a year going forward for our snow removal. Just a thought I want to put out there to other councillors, because if this is something that's not every 10 years, but occurring every, we're getting 3 years in a row and then a break and another 3 years in a row, is something we need to plan for in terms of climate change. And just a thought I want to put out there to people. Thank you, Mr. Sig.
Did you, or you were just pointing out Randy? Okay. Councillor O'Keefe.
So I just wanted clarification, active transportation plan. I know we've had some email back and forth, and the idea that I had floated out there was about doing active transportation this year so that we could perhaps get, because there's grant money available, and to get the grant money for the infrastructure, you have to have the plan in place. And I understand, staff's concern about doing an active transportation plan. We're doing the OCP, and in the most recent communication this afternoon, it was mentioned that the CRD has a plan that we could use. And so what I'm wondering is, if the CRD has that plan in place, would we be able to use that for any of the projects that we have for this year? Like, I'm thinking about, I know that they have to be shovel-ready projects, but I was thinking specifically of the Portland Loo, because it's a pedestrian facility that is one of the things we can apply for. And so I was just wondering whether that CRD plan that we already have access to could be used in order for us to apply for that infrastructure stuff this year.
I might defer to Ms. Clary, but I believe the CRD plan just makes reference to Rest Haven being a dedicated future bike lane. So that's why it's specific to that as an example. It doesn't make reference to other elements such as
Well,
washrooms, etc.
I just took a quick breeze through it this afternoon just to see what it looked like. And it looked like it talked about not only just bike paths, but it also talked about what they call pedestrian facilities. So I was just kind of thinking, oh, Portland Loo might fall under pedestrian facility, and it's pretty well shovel ready, I think, because we just have to buy it and, you know, sort of plop it somewhere. So I guess I was just kind of floating that out there as a, if that's something that, I mean, it would be nice to get some money to if we can, for this year to apply for that, so.
We will look at any opportunities for grants that we certainly can, and
Okay.
We'll take a look at that one, Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, and I was just wanting to clarify, so if we're not gonna do a active transportation plan this year, I think Mr. Hisik made some reference into some of the notes that there was provision in it somewhere in the budget, but I wasn't sure exactly where it was. And so if we think that we still need to do that, if the CRD one isn't going to cover, you know, all these things we want to do we still have to plan for that, say, for next year or in subsequent years? And so I'm just not sure where it currently is.
It was approved as a supplemental item in 2019, and it'll be carried forward at the appropriate time. So even though council decided not to pursue it from a workflow standpoint in 2019, it was still decided to keep the budget in the current year, and that'll be brought forward at the bylaw
Okay.
adoption stage.
Okay, I just wasn't, like, what would it be sort of lumped in, like when I'm looking?
Environmental project.
Oh, okay, it's underneath that. Okay, so that's something, so, and if we decide that that is something that we want to do we need to factor that into this budgeting process in terms of if we decide we want to do an active transportation plan next year, do we need to factor that in now, or should we?
From a budget standpoint, nothing further needs to be done.
Oh, okay, it's sitting there anyways, and once we decide that, say in strategic planning in the fall that we want to do that, then we would pull it out of there and,
That's correct. And
Okay.
with respect to trying to advance the plan to accommodate capital, it's much easier to defer the capital until the plan is done instead of trying to do more than we can accomplish.
right, okay. Okay, that's good, thanks.
Right. Then I will take my turn. Let you finish your drink. I think all of the questions that I had have been asked by another counselor. So thank you everybody for that, and thank you Mr. Hisik for that presentation. I guess now that Councillor O'Keefe has brought up the two things, I guess, the idea of being able to get funding because of the CRD's plan, and now that you have actually showed us a map of where the Portland Loos might go. On the one hand, my misgivings about them were on the manufacturer's website, one of the things that they said was, you know, an intentional design feature was that you could see and hear activities inside for security reasons. And I thought, okay, so you can see their feet, but the fact that they've made it intentionally that, you know, police can hear whether there are people in there made me kind of wonder about, very particularly about placement, and particularly with Sydney's demographic. I know Victoria has one, and it's mostly to catch the after bar crowd and homeless people and people who are very much going in public in the first place. and maybe are less concerned about that. I worry about our placement being in a good spot for Sydney to make sure that the privacy that I think a lot of our citizens would expect is still there. I haven't gone to use it yet. And I asked people about how they felt about that, and most people said, you know, if it was an event, we'd be using porta potties anyway, and porta potties are not exactly a private experience. So in balance, anyone I asked about it said no, they thought it was fine, but that was just what had come to my mind when I'd read it. But now, having seen that one of the spots that you had was the 5th Street in Beacon, which I initially had thought because of that was, ooh, not private. On the other hand, it's right on an existing bike route. It's right next to the 72 bus stop where a lot of people would be transferring from. And if we can pair that with some of the bike storage solutions we've been talking about, maybe it still fits within kind of our bike transportation plan that we're having. I know it's Rest Haven that they've identified as a bike pathway, but I mean, Rest Haven ends at Beacon and it's 5th that goes onto the Lochside Trail. And that would just be a really key corner for being able to get people to do that bus to bike transfer, and having a washroom there for people using the bus and bike might really fit into that. So just for consideration while we're talking about that. And the second is, again, with the Climate Action Coordinator. I know this is being envisioned as a 2-year hire, and the more we hear from staff about, you know, everyone's working already very much a full-time job, and climate action on top of that is just going to be very difficult. And while we've labeled it an emergency, and Councillor Wainwright has brought up that we should be looking at those initiatives as the very short-term ones that 2-year term positions should do, those adaptation ones I think are going to be more important. I'm of the opinion mitigation is pretty much closing the door after the horse is over the hill and far away. And it's not a climate emergency so much as climate new reality, and that whoever will be doing that job, I feel, will be much like our engineer who has just been brought online because development hasn't stopped. We've just had, you know, it continue and continue, and our requirements for adaptation, snow removal may be increased year after year, will probably continue. And I don't know if staff's other burdens, sitting that we have, what, $14 million of capital replacement coming up in the next 5 years, is going to decrease. And we've asked them to view everything through a climate lens, which they will be able to do from just their professional background, but there's so much new material coming out all the time, new regulations and direction and studies from other levels of government, that when I look at that, I wonder if a 2-year position, really, we're looking at a 5-year budget. Realistically, in a few years' time, are we probably going to be hearing that we actually need an actual full-time staff position there? And I can see Mr. Humble has something to say.
So typically, if we're going to be looking at a new position, it makes sense for us to start by looking at a term position, looking at especially when we're looking at a position that is dealing with something as I guess new and fresh perhaps as climate action, and I think there's an opportunity over that 2-year time frame to see what kind of impact a position like that can have on the organization, and take a leadership role with respect to undertaking some of the climate action initiatives that are deemed desirable. I think after that 2-year period, that's an opportunity then to assess and sort of say, okay, is this something that we want to extend for another set period of time? Or is it something, in fact, that there is a new reality and we want to perhaps look at a regular full-time position? So it's really an opportunity to start out and assess the position and see if it's something that specifically fits our need as a community and as an organization, and then make those decisions after that. In terms of initiating it in the spring of 2021, I mean, from staff's perspective, if there's a desire by council to advance that, that's something that we could certainly certainly look at. We're, you know, from a staff perspective, we're open to that. What I don't see of value, though, is looking at hiring a position because we want to maybe focus the position on active transportation planning or something like that. I mean, quite frankly, it takes up to 6 months to really get a new position filled, and then get through that position, get that individual through orientation, get them up to speed on the community, and then determine, okay, what are the priorities that we want that new position to focus on. So it does take a bit of time. So anyways, that's why we're suggesting sort of leaving it until 2021. However, again, if council wants to advance that, we're more than prepared to look at it.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I think what you've said is reasonable. I know onboarding employees is sometimes makes people delay it more than they need to, simply because no one has the capacity to train the person who's going to help them. And it's not, and giving us that additional time maybe gives us more time to discuss even strategically as part of our next strategic planning session, how much of that position should be limited to mitigation measures due to climate emergency, and how much, if you do want to evaluate a position as more long-term, we can start trialing how they might help with adaptation. So, I mean, maybe how that position actually works doesn't need to be hashed out too much at this point in time. And what you've said goes. I had something. Oh, okay. Active transportation plan. You mentioned that again. So I'm glad we've had this discussion, just because it was on a strategic plan before. Central Saanich is doing theirs concurrently with some of their OCP review, and North Saanich is as well. So definitely members of the public, I can see why people would be asking why we are not doing it concurrently to harmonize, and why, since we've had it before, it seems to be less of a priority. And I think just for the purpose of, just for the public to say, part of that discussion, Andrew had mentioned it, that we just want to get going on things, and with the amount of time it can take to do a plan, I know I was definitely one person who, when I saw the opportunity for some of the new bike lanes and things that stuff we're able to get in the budget with the staff we have and what we were doing, I had been quite eager to do that and get that going as well before we actually had a specific plan, which kind of feels like it takes longer. So thank you for providing lots more of the background to how that worked out. Does anyone have? Councillor Rintoul?
Yeah, I'll certainly yield if anyone wants to continue that same vein of thought, but otherwise I was going to move on and try and take a look at some different aspects of the budget. Thanks, Madam Chair. Some general comments. The sewer and water operating budgets seem to me almost to be housekeeping matters at this point to adopt those. So hopefully we can do that this evening, and that helps staff focus on what remains to be addressed. From my perspective, having reviewed this and put into context the prospect of the tax increase, I'm more comfortable seeing council work to try and reduce the increase that's proposed at 2.98%. And see us, in my mind at least, try and get somewhere not greater than 2%. And I recognize that there are a few avenues in which to do that. But I did want to have a discussion around Schedule A, which is attached to the staff report today around 2020 tax-funded projects, and get some insight, from staff on some of those particular projects. And I'll start with decorative street lighting, which has a budget line of $28,650. To staff, are there specific locations earmarked for decorative street lighting in 2020?
It's generally an opportunity fund for lights we can add by adding on to development, but I'll defer to engineering for any plans they might be aware of.
Andrew, that's correct. When we work with developers, they come in and they're doing improvements on the frontage. sometimes we have an opportunity to add additional lighting that's not on the frontage, so it's good to have that fund available for that type of work. We do have some other lights that are in need of replacement, some older ones that we're looking at doing as well, at Eastview Park, potentially on Seaport as well.
What, oh,
Did you have a
Well,
continuation?
just on this particular question, if I might, has the, there has been a budget, or there is an ongoing budget for decorative street lighting, and what is that in magnitude to what this increase is proposed?
The annual budget for that program is 30,000, so this is exactly at that level. It's not an increase per se, it's just showing how much tax funding is being applied to it, because it's an annual allocation of tax funding for this program.
thank you. Is there a particular area of Sydney which is included within planning to incorporate further decorative street lighting to staff?
Well, there is a lot of construction activity going on right now, and lots of approved but not yet proceeding projects, so I can see this being needed this year.
Sorry, just to seek clarification on my previous question. So we have had, for example, in the 2019 budget, an amount of $30,000 for decorative lighting,
Mm-hmm.
and it was used, and
I don't recall exactly how much was used, but it varies every year, and any unused funds are carried forward to reduce the tax impact for the subsequent year. So that's why it's only at $28,650. So that leads me to believe that most of it was used last year, and about $1,300 was unused and carried forward to reduce the impact for 2020.
okay, I guess my question is really, if we've been doing decorative lighting as part of redevelopment or infill or whatever the terms might be used for additional lighting, isn't it a line item? And I would have seen this as an increase to the existing line item budget rather than annually annually approving amounts for decorative lighting.
Well, it is identified as an annual and recurring project, along with a number of other similar items, but because it's a tax-funded capital project, it is something that's possibly reduced or eliminated or deferred for a year. That's why it's highlighted in this section.
Okay, so if we did spend, last question on this, Madam Chair, if we did spend this money this year, if development continued apace, we could foresee staff recommending a similar capital project in next year, for example, maybe tweaking the amount.
It is a recurring 30,000 item, and if there's a year where we know there's a larger than normal level of lights expected, we'll ask for more.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll carry on then. Yeah, thank you. I guess I'd like to have known if we have a particular area of Sydney that we're looking to try and complete decorative street lighting and how those funds help us meet that goal. But I've heard the comments that it's reoccurring and it says infill occurs, and so I'll give that some consideration. My next question is around Rotary Park chain link fence. I note that the fencing is over the course of the 5 years, that particular project seems to be reoccurring. Obviously, I guess with an aim to gradually replace the fencing, or is it new fencing for a section of the park? And at whose request was the chain link fence project?
I'll defer to Mr. Robinson on this one.
Through the chair to Councillor Ridgewell, it was a bit of a risk management assessment that we have. A lot of the chain link fence is the original chain link fence that was installed in 1992. The bottom portions of the fence are starting to curl out. It's something that balls get stuck in, kids are diving there quickly to try and retrieve a ball, and the fences, there's some sharp edges on it. So rather than try and replace all the fencing, we're trying to do it incrementally. We're picking a couple of backstops a year to work on it. Some of the fencing, it's not that it can be retightened or restrung, but the chain link fencing and the way it's woven, once it deteriorates and it gets those bows in it, you really can't re-stretch it. You have to replace it and put it in. Based on the longevity of the fence that's in there now, it's kind of served its useful life, and we're taking the opportunity to do it in a phased approach.
So, in a follow-up question, if I may, this is mainly outfield fencing, I take it, the perimeter of the various ball diamonds that are there then that we're referring to, and the town is under obligation, I take it, with its agreement with the association to provide this level of service, or have we been requested specifically by baseball to do this, or you're just saying it's an ongoing maintenance matter that needs to be addressed?
Yeah, it's, through the chair to Councillor Ringtool, it's a bit of a combination, certainly through our operating committees. There's a wish list that the ball executive has every year. Certainly our agreement says that they invested in the capital infrastructure and that we would maintain it over the course of time. Certainly this is on a cost share with North Saanich as well, 50-50. We administer the budgets for that. It does come under part of our annual Municipal Insurance Association inspection protocols, and this is an area that they've showed we're at risk.
Thank you. Next item, if I may, Madam Chair, a series of improvements to the RCMP building. There was some notes throughout the budget documents around an assessment of the building and upgrades that were required in relation to security requirements, some changes. I take it some of these items relate to that assessment, and others may relate to building condition that may not be security oriented. Specifically, I'll ask staff with regard to the window replacement at $14,361. What's the catalyst for that project to be undertaken?
That is an existing item that was in the plan from last year. It's not dependent on that security audit. It's really an energy efficiency. But however, the security audit did identify some deficiencies with the windows. We might try and kill two birds with one stone, if you will.
Are those the original windows in the building?
They are.
What year was the building opened?
95.
Thank you. Event tent and chairs, $8,600. I recollect this item was deferred last year. This is at the suggestion of staff, as I understand it, because there's an occasional request from event organizers to have event tent and chairs. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Through the chair to Councillor Ringtool, it's not a must-have, it's a like-have. Certainly with the number of events that we're co-sponsoring or endorsing throughout the town, it would be nice to have a 20 by 20 marquee. Over the past few years, we have been borrowing one from Mary Winster on a regular basis, but certainly with their events, if there is any conflicts, we wouldn't have the availability of that. One of the things we're critiqued about at Beacon Park, Summer Sounds, those types of areas, is that there is no shade in those areas. It'd be nice to provide a little bit of some sort of a shade screening on some of these larger events that we have in the summertime, and a nice robust marquee and some extra chairs would certainly benefit the project like that.
And so there are a number of rental services that provide event tents and chairs, but event organizers, I take it some events take advantage of using service of that nature, and others do not.
Absolutely.
Okay. And if I may just visit the thermoplastic crosswalks plural, $17,000. I think this came before council as part of an accessibility request, and council had referred it to budget deliberations. Is that recollection correct, staff?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, this request for the thermoplast is more of a life cycle cost of the crosswalks. Thermoplast lasts considerably longer, about a 10-year lifespan. And it's something that instead of painting them yearly, we're sort of looking from a climate lens as well, and studying crews out there on a yearly basis to paint these crosswalks, is try to get a longer life cycle of them.
Okay. Thank you. I'll yield there, Madam Chair, in the event anyone else has questions on the 2020 tax funded projects.
If Councillor O'Keefe, does anyone else further?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So question through you to, I guess, staff. In regards to the gardener and the arborist position, so the restructuring that's going on there. So the way I understand it, I just need clarification, is that we're not actually increasing our capacity. Is that correct? My understanding is that we're going to upgrade anyone who's been a gardener with the town for over 3 years will automatically be upgraded to a higher pay grade. 2 gardener positions will be upgraded to a higher pay level, and will be based on existing staff experience. And so when I look at what we have and what we're going to, we still have the same number of bodies. So I just want to clarify my understanding is correct, and that we'll be paying more, but not necessarily get any additional service as a result.
In addition to that, we are increasing our capacity in the arborist area as per the tree study thingy.
Yeah.
The name escapes me at this time, but you are correct in that we're not increasing our overall complement, just kind of realigning the jobs and providing some incentive there to long-standing people, and possibly to help with recruitment and filling vacancies.
So am I correct in saying that it's more as a retention thing in terms of?
That's a very good way of putting it. In addition to realigning the positions to our current and anticipated needs, it is also a retention tool. As we heard from some of our community partners, retention is a big deal, and eventually you're going to have to pay good people what they're worth to keep them in the organization.
Yeah, and so I guess my only, one concern I have, coming from an HR background, where in the public sector, we would often see managers that would come forward, and as a way to keep people around, they would upgrade their position. But the challenge always was making sure that made sense to the organization, because it means an additional expense to the taxpayers, of course. And so whether it was something that we often discourage from doing unless there was evidence that there was more complexity to the job, there was more knowledge, experience, skills required that would justify a reclassification. So those are some of the things sort of swimming around in my head on that one. The other question, just switching gears to the short-term rentals. So $6,000 on the enforcement of that, and it sounds like we have maybe about 50 short-term rentals out there. Of course, we don't know, because we need to follow up on our enforcement strategy. So I'm just wondering about a little bit more info on the $6,000 for that. I understand it's for a license that will go out there and monitor what's going on in that realm. And I guess what I'm wondering is, do we need to purchase an annual license Or is it one of those things where you could just go, say, once a month, go in and pay $60 or $100 to get a profile of what's out there? Or whether we do need to have it sort of as an ongoing thing all throughout the year?
Defer to Ms. Clary on that one.
Through chair to council. So this is for a company who actually collects data online, and they'll monitor it and monitor short-term rentals, and they'll actually go and they'll find the owners of the short-term rentals and find who they are and build a case if we actually want to charge them or
Okay.
ticket them. So it's more than just checking, because you can check, but it's very hard to actually build a case to back up the ticket that we would potentially give them. So that's what it is. When our bylaw officer, when we learned about this magical tool, he put it out on the bylaw enforcement of BC, and several other smaller municipalities are doing this sort of thing. There's different companies. We met with one. We did a bit of a webinar with one. So there's other companies that we can look at as well. So.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, that's helpful just to round it out a little bit more about what it involves. Good. I think that's it for me.
All right, Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pretty sure it's a lot more than 50 that we have, just based on archaic research I've done. I'm just looking at the town fitness room equipment upgrades, and I know it's a small amount, but and I understand the rationale staff has for having it, but I'm not sure if I can see that as being something that taxpayers should fund. As far as comments earlier about RCMP, I know we deferred a few things from them last year, and I've been giving this a lot of thought because I look at the community safety building at almost 17 million, where ambulance and firefighters are in, and I look at the building, the RCMP are in, 25 years old, kind of running down, kind of learning, shelf life's getting a little sketchy, and I think how important they are in our community. And to be able to supply a building that's secure and safe and healthy for the people who work in and out of that building, I think is a critically important thing for our community. So I'd like our fellow members to think about that when comes time to assessing whether we want to go ahead with the funds in that building. I think it's long overdue, and I think it's something we should be doing for them in our community to help them. So thank you.
If I can, just a comment on the town fitness room, just in terms of employee wellness. I just wanted to point out that the RCMP are big users of that facility as well as, and they support the employee wellness component. So just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Well, anybody else? No? Okay. Thank you. Town garbage collection, increase in $10,000. And so I asked about that because we approved $5,000 last year for that. And we thought that would be all right. And so we're talking about another 10,000. And the response we got was that there's an ever-increasing cost of dumping of all the downtown garbage that is collected from our community events. And I guess a question I have through to the chair to staff is, do we collect any fees, or should we be sort of assessing fees for organizations that have events downtown to pay for that excess garbage fees? I don't know. I'm just, if that's something that we normally do or had considered.
It's really hard to pinpoint exactly where it's coming from. I mean, a reasonable person could look to an event and point to an increase in attendance, therefore consumables, therefore garbage, but we have to think of it as victims of our own success. The more people we draw in here, the better for our local economy. Therefore, we might not feel a need to try and inhibit events from happening because of that cost.
All right. And just one more about the trees, just because I'm curious. So trees are shown in two places. There's the public space trees of 8,700, and then there's 20,000, the annual tree program, so about 19,000. And so I'm just curious, how many trees does that get us? And I presume this is part of our urban forest strategy, so I'm just curious as to how far that gets us.
I will let Miss Clary flesh that one out, but generally this 20,000 annual program is a new addition to our capital plan to try and address the recommendations from the tree thingy.
Right.
So being the first year, we're expecting to learn and grow from this and just see where it goes, but Jen, please.
I mean, I guess it's not, the $20,000 for trees is not 100% for trees, it's for things related to trees. For example, if we did want to do a large planting in a specific park, there might need to be other upgrades to the park to make sure that the space for the trees is adequate. And also the tree appreciation day would fall into that, so any funding that we need for that would come out of that as well. So it's not a direct relation to the number of trees that gets you, because there's other things that go into encouraging trees.
Right, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Fallon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I listen to my colleagues going through and pulling out the questions and knowing the things that I pulled out and looked for further information, comment was made, that we're experiencing our own success and the costs of it. I think that is a really big thing. We've just had two organizations, both Shaw and the museum, coming here, talking about the work they're doing and the expectation that we and therefore our community has on what their facility should be like, and the caliber of facility and caliber of the employees, and that extends right back into our own workplace. It's the RCMP and whatnot. All of this costs money. And whether it's the events we put on and the garbage that ensues because of it, and we then have to pay to have that garbage picked up and disposed of, or whether it is we've become a popular place and we have short-term rentals, and then there's outfall because of that. And as I look at the budget, and I think it's absolutely wonderful, both from our perspective, from the rest of the community, that you have a budget put together like this by our staff and a council that will ask the questions. But to start pulling too tightly on the budget, I think we do ourselves a disservice. We are who we are because of all of the things that we provide. And if that means that we have to have a bylaw enforcement for short-term rentals, or we ensure that we have a backup arborist for succession planning, or that we have hydro boxes that have artwork on them, and that we engage our public for the OCP or any of the other projects we do, I think it's important that we do these things. And everybody would like us to save money, but I think if we cut it too tightly, we do ourselves a disservice. And I want to impress upon my colleagues to think carefully as we pull through the budget at what expense we're cutting this year's budget and for what the end purpose is. I would love to be able to say, let's bring it down to 2 or 2.5. That'd be wonderful. But at the same time, I'm trying to figure out what it is we should be cutting. So I'm just going to leave it at that point and finish off. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallon. Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, and I appreciate the comment. One of the things that I was thinking about was how much do we need to cut to achieve the 2% target that my colleague mentioned, and roughly 120,000 is what we need to find to do that. Some of the things we've got in the budget, like the OCP review, that ends and does not continue after we have that project done. So, and we do want to do a good job on the OCP review and throw the necessary resources at it. I get that. But if we decided that we were going to skip Hydrobox revitalization this year and pick up after the OCP review is done, you can make that decision. And, you know, the thing you have to do is be careful about how you do this, because if you cut something with the intent of putting it back, it comes back, and it makes the future years harder. But it may be that we could find some of the cuts that my colleague is looking for. I'm having trouble seeing 120 without being very aggressive. And, you know, you can do things like say, well, thermoplastic crosswalks, only do half as many, you know? So do some this year, do some after the OCP review is done. We can do a bunch of stuff like that, and I'm game to start down that particular road, but I have to say that I'm not really expecting I can find 120. And I've also got a couple of things that might be going the other way. So we have this CM Harbor Environmental Management, which has no tax impact, because we're proposing to use the money that we got from the developer with respect to those beach stairs at All Bay Road. And my understanding at the time we had that discussion was that we were going to spend the money on, and actually I think it was suggested on beach accesses at Roberts Bay. CM Harbor Environmental Management seems to be a bit around the corner from Roberts Bay. And I'm going to say, I don't actually support using that 10,000 outside of Roberts Bay. So that would put 10,000 back in on the tax funded side, but I think it's the right thing to do. Anyway, I think though that either tonight we try to roll up our sleeves and find some of those cuts, or maybe we should have, you know, continue the discussion and leave trying to actually make things happen to the next meeting. I will support my colleague's suggestion that the utility budgets, water and sewer, are pretty much a no-brainer, and I'll move we accept them as presented.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Well, we could discuss it.
We can discuss, sorry. Discussion.
Nope, seeing
No.
none.
All right, I'll call the question. Okay. Unanimous.
Sorry, point of order. Do you separate resolutions on those through staff, through the chair to staff, separate resolutions on those components?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, but one will suffice.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the balance of comments. I might suggest that while we've provided very good information from staff on the budget, and particularly when you have a $10.1 million capital budget and the number of projects that are included, there's a lot of detail to review. It's not all tax funded, of course, but there is a lot of detail to review. And specifically, we did have a chart tonight on tax funded projects, and we've been asking questions. And I don't think a question on a particular project is an intention of a colleague to want to cut it. I think it is perhaps just to have some additional information and might lead to further consideration. And I would suggest, I came this evening, apart from the budgets that we have approved, not to necessarily propose cuts this evening or alterations, but to gather further information in public, and while we've had excellent information from staff, that might help us when we do our final deliberations in 2 weeks. And in that spirit, I do have a couple of questions on areas that haven't been touched on yet. And the first is the Iroquois Path paving at 20,000, and it does mention in the binder that there are some sections that should be replaced. My question through chair to staff is, the park is about 8-9 years old. What portion of the pathways will this $20,000 cover, and do we foresee additional amounts needed in near years to do ongoing maintenance?
Through the chair to the mayor, that particular section of path is on the western boundary, right up against the work chart. There's a pedestrian connector link that comes off the wire overpass onto North Lawn Terrace and then runs up and connects with our linkage onto 8th Street. So there's another improvement actually in the budget for that final little piece of 8th Street as well. Certainly we're seeing lots of the people from the west side of Sydney using that route. They prefer it to the Lochside Trail just because it's less exposed to the elements, the traffic noise and things like that. Again, we're seeing lots of people with mobility scooters, bicycles, things like that using it. The trail is in place, they would just like to have an asphalt surface.
Okay, thank you. Supplemental to that. So the intention is to keep that section of path long-term with the other route that has been opened?
Correct.
Great, thank you. The next is Tempest, which is under the computer budget, and I understand is computer software through to staff?
That's right.
Do we currently have Tempest, different modules of Tempest software in use at the town?
It is one of our critical software systems. It's our land system as well as planning, and we find new and better ways to use it to make our work more efficient, with some of these examples being the e-inspections and the various other improvements we've done over the last couple of years.
Have we had, if I can refer to them as modules, different parts of software, have we brought in pieces in recent years? And
we do tend to add a new module every few years.
Okay.
But right now it's making a concerted effort to automate many of our processes.
Okay, which leads to my question is that there is 5 separate components here totaling 55,000, and have we brought that much new software, into use, to bring, folks up to speed in a particular area? And
could I possibly defer to Mr. Restel on a couple of these? I think he's more familiar with
Well, what I can say about them is many of these modules we're bringing in are for different areas of the town. So I know one of them specific to finance, but the rest are planning, engineering, so they're all different projects.
okay, it just sounds like a large group at one time, but I appreciate the answer. Next question through the chair to staff is with regards to EV chargers at the works yard. Can I just have clarification? I know we've been told before how many EV vehicles we currently have in the town fleet.
we have 1 electric and 2 hybrid.
Okay, and we do have 2 chargers here at the hall.
That's correct.
Okay, and so currently the vehicles are only charged at the hall.
That's correct.
So, but these vehicles commonly go between the works yard and the hall, and so the intent is to have a charger there such that if the vehicle happens to be there for part of a day, it could be charging.
I'd like to defer to Mr. Robinson to address the one at the works yard.
Through the chair to the mayor, we used to have originally had one at the work yard. Again, should we have to do service work on our electric vehicle overnight, we can charge it in. What we ended up doing was, because of the popularity of the site at the town hall, we relocated the one that we had at the work yard to twin the one at town hall. So we had public use as well as our own vehicle. So the opportunity is to replace this. In the vehicle replacement plan this year that looks like we may have an opportunity to replace one of our building inspection vehicles with an electric vehicle this year. We're certainly going to go over the request for proposal with that consideration in mind.
Okay, thank you. You've answered my next question about possible additions to the fleet. Thank you. And the last is with the lighting. There was questions asked earlier with regards to decorative lighting, and the 28,000, as it's indicated in the budget package, actually at $6,000 a light is only paying for 5 or 6 lights, additional lights in the town. So similarly with the thermoplastic crosswalks of a budget of 17,000, how many crosswalks does that do? Just
it's intended for that for Sydney Avenue to replace all the crosswalks on Sydney Avenue currently painted. So looking from 2nd Street up to, I believe, to 5th Street and getting those as thermoplastic.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll thank the Mayor for questions with respect to Tempest, and as he noted, it appears multiple times under the tax-funded projects totaling about $55,000. This 5 projects that I asked about earlier total $76,000, so there's $131,000 between those. Not suggesting, obviously, that we need to get to that 2% figure, but it seems like through cancellation or deferral, there may well be opportunity to have a serious discussion of that nature. I do get the feeling that council may need to let some of this germinate before we specifically try and tackle that. As the Mayor noted, maybe this evening's not the night to go through and sort of test those waters, but I would next look to the contribution to regional economic development identified on page 218 of the binder. The $26,722 outlined there, I take it to staff, relates specifically to SIP.
That's correct.
Thank you. And subsequent to SIP's visit to council, where specific financial information was requested, they provided an impact report which makes references to their 2019 finances, indicating their year-end March 31st, 2019, that they had cash of about $330,000. Based on their income statement for that 2019 March 31st year end, they had excess of revenue over expenses of $67,000 and change. In 2018, they had revenue over expenses of $116,000 and change. So I guess not having them here to specifically ask about the cash reserves and their intent for that $330,000. I do have in my mind, some concern around our continued involvement in SIP. Having said that, certainly they've done a great job, as we look to them to do, around membership and building membership over the course of the last year. I don't know locally if each of the other municipalities on the peninsula are members and participants of SIP. I don't recollect from the presentation, but perhaps I can pose that question to staff.
They are.
And under the funding model, they contribute at the same level as Sydney would?
I can't say exactly how much.
They do contribute on a proportional basis.
Okay, but it would be less than what Sydney's contributing in that case, I would assume.
Sorry, I can't recall if it's by population, but Central Sandwich would be larger, and North Sandwich would be about the same.
So it's, if it was based on population?
I believe it is, yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'll leave it there, Madam Chair.
Thank you. If I may, just because it's a follow-up to Councillor Rintoul's, that's an amount that's currently under agreement. So is this our, no? Oh, I'm sorry. It's a Group 1 Regional Economic Development Agreement or bylaw. Oh, sorry, that's the one above it. This is Group 2 Economic Development.
It's an informal agreement with SIP, if you will. We made an informal commitment for 5 years, and last year council identified it as a potential cut if they didn't come back with certain information.
And what year of that 5 years are we at for 2020 now?
This would be the 5th year.
The 5th year. Okay, so after this, we wouldn't be making money, but provisionally, we've kind of already told them we would be. Mr. Mayor?
Sure, as your representative to SIP, the original was 5 years of funding, and so this does, or if we choose to approve, would complete the 5th year of funding. But SIP will look to maintain the current membership model where the municipalities are members, where there's First Nations as members, where there's private business as members, where there are the 3 post-secondary education as members. And we would, they would approach us again with a new, whether it's a 3-year, 5-year proposal for funding. And to say where that is, they're undergoing a strategic review this year. So I wouldn't know where that funding request would be at, but I would anticipate there would be continued funding requests.
Okay, I had Councillor O'Keefe and then, Councillor Garnett and.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question through to staff in regards to the number of quite large vehicle replacement requests. And what I was wondering is, chatting with North Saanich or Central Saanich councillors this past week on the tour of industry, and they were talking about, it seemed that there was some practice in the past where the different municipalities would exchange notes, so to speak, in regards to their major expenditures that they were making on big pieces of equipment and big trucks and things, and then I guess look for opportunities to share those resources if it was something that was quite unique and might not be used a lot or for just for certain times. So I'm just wondering if that practice still exists, and whether that's something that we're looking at.
I'll let Mr. Robinson flesh this one out, but as you say, if it's quite unique and rarely used, that description doesn't apply very often to our equipment.
Through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe, certainly one-offs or limited use as a good neighbor, that type of stuff does go on from time to time. We have a bucket truck that we loan out to North Saanich on the odd occasion. If you're suggesting that we all partner up and spend $200,000 or $300,000 a piece on a hydro excavator and then share it between us, I think you'd have a fight over the use of that. Who services it? Who pays for that catastrophic failure? If your worker happens to be the fellow that's driving at the time, so that does get a little bit problematic. Fuel consumption, wear and tear, that kind of thing. Certainly, some of the larger pieces of equipment, our sweeper and our hydro excavator, are both up this year. That's going to come to about $750,000. We've got a loader in the budget as well for $160,000 as we're starting to do a little bit more transfer and earth moving out of our works yard. We're going to research that one a little bit more, just to see, make sure that we've got added value. The business case is sound for that, but it's been a placeholder for the last couple of years. The other reason that we thought a loader might come in handy is certainly if we did have a catastrophic event, the ability for a loader to remove rubble, large amount of snow, things like that, to open up and clear roads. It's nice to have that type of a vehicle in your own capacity in case you need it on a 24/7, 365 type of a basis.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, referring to Councillor Rentoul's comment about SIP, I also have some concerns, and I read through the impact report, and I noted on page 57 that under salaries and benefits there was an increase from 2018 to 2019 of almost $106,000. So for me, that's a little problematic if we're giving them money. So just more of a comment than anything else. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's not, we've gone over, I think, has everyone, Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm very much supportive of SIP as a participant and your representative, and I understand and appreciate the comments that have made this evening, and perhaps we'll wait till next meeting to speak further. But I did want to request, building on Councillor Rantoul raising, if Mr. Hisik, through you, Mr. Hisik, if you could bring up the slide on economic development, please. So we see for the year, well, we don't see 219, but sorry, for 2020 for our budget this year, the unallocated portion would be $33,000. And there have been, as we know, the Economic Development Fund is about 10 years old as being an item in the budget. Didn't exist before that. And every year, I think virtually every year, there have been substantial unallocated funds. That is, they weren't assigned to anything. And last year I spoke to this, and I want to raise it again this year, that nowhere else in the budget do we actually leave a pot unallocated, you know, for a department or for an operation, area of operation in the business to access randomly. Well, sorry, it's not random. They would have to come to council to request the money, but nowhere else do we put funds out there, whether it's a small pot or a large pot. So my suggestion is that we remove the unallocated portion from the budget, subject to our decision with regards to SIP, and that I know we have had different economic advisory committees in recent years, and they have made recommendations, some recommendations vis-a-vis the Economic Development Fund, and some of that money has been spent under that. We have a new Economic Advisory Committee started this year. Very impressed with how they've undertaken their new role, and I could see with future recommendations that they might indeed have a particular initiative that they want to bring forward, but I think we should consider those and consider them in conjunction with the next budget. Or as a unique item mid-year. So this is this $33,000 is tax-funded portion. So I would suggest we give consideration, not necessarily going to make the resolution this evening, but just with all of the other things we're considering, to giving thought to that at our next deliberations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for bringing Mr. Councilor Roderick.
Thank you. A question through you to staff. In our discussions about Beacon Wharf, it's been suggested that we have somebody look into the option of a floating structure, and that there was likely going to be some cost involved in getting the engineers to look at that. Does staff have an estimate of that item? Because it's not currently in the budget, is it?
It's in the staff report as a recommendation number 2 with an estimate of $25,000.
I see that. Funded from the Boat Launch Trust?
Correct.
Okay.
Great, thank you. So, has everybody asked questions about individual line items that they wanted to? Because what it sounds like to me is that most of the appetite for tonight is towards getting information, throwing out items for discussion, and really moving on to making decisions at the next committee meeting. I had that understanding as well. I guess the final thing that I wanted to add, I guess for staff consideration, I know Andrew frequently will prepare something before the next one where he kind of takes into account what he's heard. The preferences from council was last time, of course, to really look for things to cut. This time I concur with Councillor Fallett that, and Councillor Wainwright, different reasons, that I don't really see much to cut in terms of a lot of these are very small budget items. We'd have to cut a lot of them, and then we start looking at kind of quality of service. I also see that a lot of these things, even if we defer them, eventually happen. And we know that there are still things that in this report have you know, are capital items that have not actually been fully captured, and that needs to be assessed. So to assume that we're gonna have more money in future to deal with, say, little crosswalk items, most of these things, they look like things that need to happen, and the very small things that may be discretionary, like event tents, are so small that they don't really make an effect on on taxes. So for me, looking at this looks like this is what it costs to run our town now with the level of service and infrastructure we have. And compared to municipalities last year that had been deferring a lot of their projects and the tax impact their citizens received, when they finally got around to internalizing those again, it was big. And I'd rather, if it's going to be small amounts of tax increases going forward, I'd rather have them be small rather than have to defer and defer and defer until we finally have to have a big chunk that's really going to surprise people. So the other thing I hear is the mayor has just raised about the Economic Development Fund, and Councillor Wainwright had brought up about a $20,000 possibly being from that going towards something like a climate action initiative. Is that a lot of these things that we are having under the budget that are being justified, like extra garbage collection downtown, it's kind of the cost of having a thriving downtown, decorative streetlight. There's a number of things that are really kind of economic development initiatives. And so the idea of having an economic development fund where we're looking for new economic development initiatives, when it sounds like our town is doing really well with the ones we have, and that a lot of what makes our town, the economic development we have is really in terms of building on what we already do well and making sure that we continue doing that well. And so to that end, I would wonder how much of what we have under Economic Development Fund that shows up as surplus all the time could be allocated to some of these initiatives, and or whether it's directly as an economic development thing, or in simply cutting down what that pot of the Economic Development Fund is, so that we can allocate some more of these things. Event tents seems like one thing. You could rent them out, but on the other hand, knowing that Sydney has that to support our events and that they don't have to worry about being booked out, could really be a kind of it's an in-kind development. So.
I guess where I'm going, just sorry to interject, is that it's been referred to as the Economic Development Fund. Is within the Economic Development Fund there are commitments, and some of them are longer term, such as the commitment to the BIA. Some of them are shorter, such as the one we made to the chamber, and so we will continue to get very different requests in the future. What I'm suggesting is we take off fund. Is there are going to be line items in the budget. What is currently in the budget for the SBIA, even though it shows under the Economic Development Fund, is in fact a line item. And we are not looking at all line items. It's just being presented as the Economic Development Fund and what the unallocated portion is. I'm suggesting when we remove the unallocated portion that we don't have a fund anymore. What we have is a line item that's, extends for another 2 years if it's a commitment to a particular organization, or an organization is going to come forward, such as we've had 2 organizations this evening, that may be economic development related rather than what the museum is or what the aquarium is, and we would consider them as we're considering all of these supplemental requests within the budget.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I do see that we're not going to make really substantial progress tonight, but I'm wondering if there are still a couple of things we should probably talk about a little bit. One of them being the request from the Shaw Centre, and the other one being the increase in funding for the museum. And I can say I'm comfortable supporting the Shaw Centre request. I'm not sure if everybody else is, but that is obviously one of the big ticket items. If the majority was not in favor of that, that's going to change the tone of the, are we staying at 2.98% or aiming for the lower number? So it would be useful to have some feel for that. In the case of the museum, I'm not as comfortable supporting it. and, you know, very worthwhile organization, doing lots of good things, but we have a lot of things we need to spend money on, and it is a discretionary activity. I could compromise on half the amount they're asking for, and from what I heard, that would mean that they would hire somebody part-time. They would get some benefits, but they would obviously not the same amount. But this is something that would be worthwhile having a bit of conversation about. I don't know where my colleagues stand.
Oh, you have the same, I'm gonna go, okay, O'Keefe, then the mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think before I would make a decision on this, I'd like us to complete the other public participation processes that we have scheduled. So I'd like to hear from the community first before making decisions. So I'm more inclined to wait until next time, and also to have a bit of time to absorb what we heard tonight. Although I'm still sort of absorbing what we heard from both tonight. So I'd like the opportunity, if there's input from the public, and to percolate on that before moving forward on a decision with those things.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a reminder to colleagues that we're meeting as committee this evening, and any decision or resolution that we would pass does have to go to council for approval. So we'd be making the motion again, or be coming forward again. And the other is that our next meeting is a special council meeting, so our decisions will be final at that meeting. In speaking to the two requests that we had presentations for this evening, I would like to consider further the aquarium request. I'm supportive of the accomplishments that they've made, but it is a large ask, and I would like to give further thought to that, and if there is any public feedback between now and February 18th. But with regards to the museum, I also, while not making a resolution this evening, do have concerns about making the full request to them, and it's partly based on what I rose during the discussion, during the presentation and questions, was $16,000 being applied to the position itself, which I am generally in support of, but the cost of living increase that the museum currently receives each year is about 2%. So this year it's $1,500 on $85,000 or something like that. So it's 2% or slightly higher. So there is a factor in there, and it can be applied to a variety of expenses, whether it's utilities or wages and that sort of thing. I realize they may have some catch-up to do within the organization, but I also highlighted in their presentation this evening that they had a surplus after expenses of $20,000 this year. And so that is allocated to certain things as well. We didn't hear this evening what that might be allocated towards. We also heard this evening that they do not have, we do have a 2020 budget before us, but they don't have longer term projections as, for example, the aquarium presented to us this evening. So I am giving consideration to a lesser amount, and partly based on the rationale of mentioned. Thank you.
Sir Garnett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just to speak to Councillor Wainwright's point, the $10,000 would not hire a part-time unless North Saanich matched. I think 20,000 was, or 18th. I think 36,000 for the position. So unless North Saanich matched it, that would pretty much not really do much anything in helping in that situation. I think it's important to remember the succession planning portion of it, because they do bring somebody on, because Peter's, he's not going to be around forever. 25 years is a long time, and there's only so much time somebody can work in a position. So I think it is important to have somebody in place and trained at a lesser wage to be able to take over once he decides he doesn't want to do it anymore, because there's no way one person can do that position. It's just way too much to ask of somebody. So I think it's not an unreasonable request, and I hope North Saanich gets on board with it as well. So thank you.
Further discussion? I was actually okay with both amounts. For for what they do and for what they're trying to do, and for the potential I see in the museum, particularly with regards to the fact that it's an archivist they're looking for. And their main role originally was really as an archival institute to keep our records safe, and increase their longevity. That making sure that we actually safeguard those, it seems to be what this money goes towards. I would feel more comfortable with making sure we actually safeguarded those, because if it seems that right now we've got a lot of stuff that we don't know about that could have value for the future, and we haven't finished getting through that accessions, I would feel bad about having dropped the funding before really securing the value of that facility to the town was achieved. And the aquarium, I know, is a lot of money. But I feel we fund arts funding, not to the same tune and magnitude, but I think it's the only thing we really have for science funding, right? You know, towns don't usually fund that. If we have a university or a college or something, and this is kind of our linkage to funding the sciences as well as the arts. And I'd really like to be able to see what that organization can do. If we know that we've only increased their funding by $60,000 in 1 year, and this will be a cumulative another $80,000, how much more that they could do. And maybe it doesn't have to be that in perpetuity, but at least for the next year after that or two, just to make sure that they can really build something good. I kind of want to see it, and I'd like to see it, and I'd hate to pull the rug out from under them too soon as well. So that was my feeling on that one.
Just one other aspect or consideration with regards to the aquarium request is with the addition of $60,000 that we provided this year, we did see tremendous results, improvement in the organization in the number of areas that we spoke to. And I'm only thinking of it now and I don't have an answer to this question, but in terms of going up another 80,000 is in effect a good portion of that going to be spent on capital replacement. We know the challenges, the unique challenges with this facility in terms of its infrastructure, in terms of 3,000 live critters, and the effects of saltwater on equipment. We saw, a slide this evening, sort of thing. So I do think we need to think of it in that context. While there has been a lot of accomplishment with 60,000, and why couldn't they just continue with 60,000? Is a good portion of the 80,000 going to be for the capital replacement that is going to be important for its continued operation and success.
All right. If we have no further comments, we do have recommendations at the end of this report. Would anybody like to move those?
Sure, I'll move the recommendation that the committee receive this report for information and that $25,000 be added to the draft operating budget funded from the Boat Launch Trust.
Okay. Call the question? Or, sorry, further discussion?
Yep.
Okay, call the question. All in favor? All right. Well, that ends that piece of our discussion, and we move on to, again, another special public participation period. And if we can hear from the public, Councillor O'Keefe has asked for more feedback to inform her views, so. Please approach, shake out your legs.
First of all, thank you for some really good deliberation there. Speaking as 33 1/3% of the public still present. I appreciate the opportunity before you pass things, even though they are recommendations to a future council meeting. I just a couple of comments as we went through, and I listened very carefully to the presentations, both from the Shaw Centre for the Salish Sea and from the museum, and certainly those are big items as they go through, and I tend to look at things with a business background, and I apologise that I always seem to look at things with a business background, but these are businesses, And so it's reasonable to look at them from that perspective, because they're going to spend your money, which means they're going to spend my money. I think what I saw this evening, and I speak just for myself, that wow, two remarkable organizations with very motivated people who have done some fantastic things with very little money. So if I was the chairman of the board of these particular companies, if you like, organizations, and they came to me and made the presentations, what would I do? How would I feed it back? And I'd look at it and I'd say, well, the museum is a well-established organization, been around for quite some time. They've got financial statements. The fact that you guys could quiz them on those financial statements into such detail meant that that detail was available, and they were able to answer those questions. They've got the history. They've got, including, you know, their major contributors. They've got corporate contributors. They've got 25 associates that they work with. They've got grants. They've gone out. They've done this stuff. They've got a couple of very committed people. They've got some good numbers. They know where they're coming from. I'd like to think that they have, and I happen to have an inkling that part of that money that they have still unspent is exactly what was alluded to earlier. They have something if they get a bad year. Maybe they would confirm that, but I suspect that they've thought of that. It's worth asking them, because you're right, we're all set for a downturn. The hotels will tell you right now that their vacancy rate is terrible. It's going to go down, and it will affect them. There was the comment about Lego. Is Lego part of, you know, what they do? But it does two things. It does bring in children. It does bring in people. And it's at the time of the year that both organizations find a downturn in the number of attendees because of, you know, we're suffering from lack of tourists. I mean, if they ever do give it up, they should give it to the Shaw Centre for the Salish Sea, because they need the money at that time of the year. So I would argue that there is a very well-structured company. You should feed a bit of success. And I would be very cognizant of the fact that the people there are stretched to the limit. And they're not, they've maybe not been keeping up with their own compensation. And I take it in succession plan. Maybe that's the minimum that you should give. And I find myself almost suggesting that you give them more. All right? I just look at that. So then I look at the Shaw Centre for the Salish Sea, and how would I look at that? It's a turnaround. It's a business that's needed a turnaround. I've done a turnaround, and they have done a fantastic job. I mean, what you see here is absolutely brilliant. They've done an engineering turnaround, they've done a facility turnaround, a people turnaround. They've really produced something. Accolades to them. I mean, that's a real job. But then I look at it as a board of directors and I say to myself, okay, great, but I've only got 6 months' numbers here. I mean, I would never, ever commit 5 years to anything based on 6 months' numbers. Just my personal opinion. You couldn't take that to a bank, you couldn't take it to an investor, you couldn't take it to anybody. And their numbers are thin. Let me put it that way. They don't have the depth, for example, that the museum has. You can't compare this year with last year. You can't compare all of their numbers as you go through. So I think they've done a fantastic job. I think they need to keep going. I think maybe even there, when I look at where they're thin, it's probably their ability to do some of that planning, to do some of that in-depth stuff that they can come back with this time next year, perhaps, and give you that information. They're asking, and I looked at their presentation, if you look at it, I don't know whether there's a tweak out there, but their 2020 numbers are not 80 plus 65. On their slide, they were already up to their 200 and odd thousand, 205,000 level. That's a lot of money. That is a lot of money. And a 5-year plan that still ends up in a loss, no. I couldn't live with that. I would be looking at them to come back and say, hey, we're going to keep doing the fantastic things that we're doing, but we're going to identify where that money is going to come from. Where's the break even going to come from? Is it going to come from grants? What grants can we apply for? Is it going to be from corporate sponsorships? What have we accomplished in the last 6 months? I'd be looking at full year numbers before I would make a long-term commitment. But again, I find myself saying, feed success. You might actually think, would an extra 20,000 to them committed this year actually help them even more to get their numbers in line, to come back and have somebody on board, even part-time, that would help them with those things that they're obviously struggling with? So, little bit of that, but no long-term commitment to either organisation. You can't line item this stuff because the town itself must think what happens when we have a downturn. I don't like line items that go on forever and commitments. So where would you get the money from if you decided to give them certainly the museum? And I can see disagreement. Obviously, I've heard disagreement. You know, give them what they're asking for, but maybe give them a bit of motivation. Look at return on investment. If the numbers are correct that are coming from the Centre for the Salish Sea, then think of the people who come to the museum and what that means to the economics of downtown. That's bringing in a lot of money, and they're not costing us all that money. Look at the Salish Sea and say, all right, let's give them their money, but for this year, and get them to come back and see, you know, what's happening after that year. I think that would be reasonable. Certainly when I look at that, where could you get it from? All right, the Economic Development Fund. This is economic development. That's where it's coming from. You know, at least, and certainly it's identifiable. I'd love to see SIP come in, with all respect, and get the grilling that you gave to Peter this evening, down to, you know, $1,500 here and whatever, given their numbers. That was quite good and quite specific. I'd want to know, what are you doing specifically for Sydney for the money that you're getting? Because I'd rather give it to some really motivated people that I heard this evening from 2 really good organisations. They were really good people, and they're local, and they're driven, and they're there. And they didn't, in their presentation, they offered to come and sell us their services to set up an economic development organisation. Well, sorry, you know, I don't think we should pay for that. Finally, I think, if I may, in all of this, yes, there are decorative lighting. By the way, we looked when, in our development, we bought 3 lights. We actually looked at the lights which the town uses, and we couldn't afford them. They were about 9,000 each when we looked at them anyway. We went with some presumably undecorative lights, LEDs, 30-year lifespan in black. 3 of them cost $11,000 for us. So installed, by the way, which wasn't bad. But certainly there are opportunities there where I'd rather see, rather than 3 decorative, give some money to these wonderful people that we heard tonight, but on a limited time basis. And final comment, this is the only opportunity, this one and maybe the next one, to make the comments that I'm making tonight. And yet, if I read the plan which Andrew puts together, which is phenomenally good in terms of detail, in terms of projects, in terms of capital expenditures, there's a lot to discuss here. And I would like to see an opportunity through the year to discuss some of those items, to have perhaps a combination of an open house, where there are exhibits, for example, which talk about, do we want to spend money on a new pier? Do we want to spend money on maybe the fishing pier, on downtown, on where as a population, where do we want to spend our money? And then perhaps a town hall meeting, so that you guys get to hear from people that come back. I appreciate the opportunity to make the comments this evening. I'm delighted to hear or note that, sorry, am I over time with something else as well? I've gone past my multiple minutes, all right? But I think actually in a public hearing you're allowed to. I understand that the budget meetings such as this one actually get double the views of the recording and the video. I won't say that makes me, a hot favorite on any social media, but I do appreciate it. But I really would like to see during the year, I'd like to see a real opportunity for people to go around and to look, not just in a short burst, and to talk about all of the things that we're doing. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time. Just a view from outside.
Thank you. Now, any of the remainder of 2/3 of the public who are here would like to make a comment, you may approach the podium.
Denny Gillina, 2545 Oakville. I won't be as eloquent as my previous speaker, but listening to tonight and thinking about what the town is facing and will face over the coming period, by that I mean years, there's a lot of potential unknowns out there with potentially big numbers attached to them. Climate change, the outcome of the OCP process, whether we have a new pier or whether we don't have a pier. And I guess going forward, my proposal would be to try and avoid long-term high-cost commitments at this stage until we kind of have perhaps a bit of a clear idea of what are the bigger dimensions on the ground that will face us. Certainly, climate change is one thing going down the roads. And so without locking ourselves into long-term, more expensive commitments to organizations, to save some opportunity to kind of figure out what are we going to be dealing with. David's comment about perhaps more opportunity for citizens to have an opportunity to comment on things like that would be very useful. I think that's all I was thinking tonight. There's a lot on the table, great discussion, and two very good presentations. One final point is what I really appreciated with the museum presentation is they've done a fabulous job in getting money from outside groups. Getting money from Heritage, I worked for Heritage for 30 years. It's like drawing teeth from a baby. Their funding has not, the museum funding is virtually non-existent, hasn't been increased in 25 years. So virtually the money there, it's not a lot. They got some funds. I was absolutely flabbergasted. So they're doing a lot of work in pushing the boundaries to find funds that weren't there before. They're bringing the exhibits to town that would never have happened without someone like Peter there. The museum, the traveling exhibits, they're hard to get, and Heritage provided $15,000 to help with the museum exhibit that happened last summer. So kudos to them. I understand there are other issues, but and perhaps maybe the CRC could try and do the same thing. I don't know what that world's like out there, but I did want to say that I thought it was quite impressive with the work they've done in doing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I can do a last call. There's only one left.
I'm going to pass.
All right.
My colleagues took my time.
All right. All right, thank you. Then I will call public participation period to a close. We have no parks or infrastructure or further business. We have no need to go in camera tonight. So can I look for a motion to adjourn? Second. Call the question. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone who managed to stay. Maybe they can't get up.